And you guys are live.
Okay. Good evening, board members and public. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We'll start by the Pledge of Allegiance. Do we have a flag?
Yes.
We do. If we can put that up. Perhaps Susan would like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Surely.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Arlene, could you please do roll call?
Sure. Hi, I'd like John Aldred, please.
Here.
Francis Bach,
Here, by phone.
Ben Dollinger, Rick Drew,
Here.
Tim Garneau,
Here.
Jim Grimes,
Present.
Mike Martinson,
Here.
Susan McGraw-Keever,
Here.
and Bill Taylor.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Very good. We have Dr. Chris Gobler here tonight to present the results of his 2020 water quality monitoring. Before we go to that, do we have any members of the public on call here that will have any are calling in?
There are no members currently on the line.
Okay. All right. Good sign. Dr. Gobler, I turn this over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for the invitation to present to you all. And I note that it was my 2020 presentation was live and in person on March 9th. Little did we know we were within days of our lives changing forever. But it seems like we're back into getting close to happier circumstances presently. So yeah, this presentation will highlight our findings from 2020. I'm going to go quickly through the first part because it's all background, but I feel like it's good warm-up information to have. So we know why East Hampton is the jewel of Long Island and the jewel of the South Fork, both its beauty and its bounty. And we also know that it's surrounded by some of the most open, best water quality water that we know of, being flushed by the Atlantic Ocean, Block Island Sound, Gardner's Bay. But we also know that there's been a sizable amount of development in certain areas across East Hampton, and that is always changing and sometimes increasing in some cases. Turning to the water, we all know that algae and phytoplankton are important as being the base of the food web and providing oxygen to ecosystems. And in many ways, in some circumstances, the more algae you get into an ecosystem, the more you can pull out when it comes to fisheries yields. But that's really a concept mainly for open ocean waters. When we get into coastal waters, that can break down a bit. And in fact, sometimes you can have too much of a good thing, particularly in terms of something we call harmful algal blooms, where some of these algae can have a negative effect on a coastal ecosystem. And there's no shortage of those on Long Island, and particularly on the South Fork. We worry probably most about Alexandrium because it makes this compound here known as saxitoxin, which is a neurotoxin that can get into shellfish. Saxitoxin is 1,000 times more potent than cyanide. Unfortunately, it led to the death of a man in Alaska last summer from consuming shellfish that had concentrated levels of saxitoxin. And we know this organism is widespread across the East End. And in fact, more than half of the shellfish bed closures, the majority have been on the East End, with the one closest to Trustees, Hampton being in Sag Harbor. So in total, 7 places that have been closed to shellfishing because of this toxin during the last decade. We also have something we call rust tide that you can see very clearly with your eye. When you see the water looking like this, you know something is amiss. This is not toxic to humans, but is known as being ichthyotoxic, can kill fish, and also has been shown to be lethal to shellfish as well. And some people have implicated this in shellfish die-offs in East Hampton. And then in our freshwater ecosystems, we worry about blue-green algae, also known as cyanobacteria. Again, like the Alexander, because they can make these toxins that can have negative effect on human health. Microcystin and anatoxinae are the most common of these, and were originally known as fast death factor and very fast death factor when they were first identified. And we know that these can lead to the poisoning of dogs. CDC has reported hundreds of such incidences. This occurred in Georgia Pond in 2012, has occurred in Fort Pond out in Montauk and other places across Suffolk County during the last decade. And there's no county in New York State that has more of these blue-green algae blooms than Suffolk County. Of 62 counties in New York State, 50 had blue-green algae blooms in 2020. There were more in Suffolk than any other county by more than double. Now, part of this has to do with our lower latitude, but and thus warmer temperatures, but that's only part of the story. There's a nutrient loading issue here as well. We also are worried about pathogenic bacteria that can get into the water. We were sort of just talking about before via stormwater runoff or other cases. These can lead to shellfish bed closures. The gold standard the DEC uses for closing a shellfish bed is fecal coliform bacteria. The DOH, Department of Health, uses enterococcus to look if a water body is swimmable or not. And we've been using emerging technology, specifically something known as digital PCR, to conduct something we call microbial source tracking. When you see high levels of fecal coliform bacteria, you can do nothing about that because you don't know where the bacteria are actually coming from ultimately. So we've been trying to use microbial source tracking to figure out where the bacteria are coming from in order to develop plans to mitigate those bacteria. And then a sort of a side note, we all know the unfortunate outcome for the scallop fishery during the past 2 years, a very serious setback. Theoretically, you could say setting things back 35 years, back to 1985 all over again. And so that's something to consider in all of this water quality data as well, and I'll address that. So that is the intro. Really that is what the report is on. These different types of harmful algal blooms, general water quality, and then specifically looking at these bacteria that can lead to the contamination of shellfish. And so in general, we're doing all of our work out in the water, bringing samples back to the laboratory at Stony Brook, Southampton. And we're always comparing the results we get to both state and federal standards. So I'm not using my opinion telling you, yeah, that's good, that's bad, but rather we're measuring up to what's known, what's required, frankly, in some cases. So here's the locations that we sampled in 2020. You can see our furthest east point was Fort Pond and Montauk. That's with assistance from the concerned citizens of Montauk. Our marine locations go from Napeague Harbor, Accabonac Harbor, 3 Mile Harbor, Northwest Creek, and Hog Creek. We also had some sampling from Fresh Pond, Hook Pond, Georgia Pond, and also Wainscott Pond. And these are just the locations, the specific locations. In some cases, for larger water bodies, we have up to 3 sampling locations, and some other ones we only have 1. These are our marine samples that we collected in 2020, and these are the ones that were fresh or brackish water samples. So to dig right into it then, I'll start with something nice and simple, and that's temperature. And that's what's shown here. And you can see this is showing the average during the summer, and then the maximal temperatures. And I put a line there at 25 because that's really a level where you start to see an ecosystem change. Seagrasses need to have temperatures 24 or below, and if they have more than 2 weeks above 24, they're in trouble. And you can see we got above that threshold for every location. at some point in 2020. We had constant temperature loggers out at a few locations, or 2 locations, and showing that here, Nat Peak Harbor sort of kept bumping up against that 25-degree range, but not far above it, really. You can see this is June into October, whereas in 3 Mile Harbor, this is back towards the head of the harbor, that threshold was breached for the first time in mid-July, and you can see there were plenty of observations, probably for a week plus during July into August of having those temperatures at that very high level, and no really sign of things cooling off much as we moved into September. And all of this is an overlaying on the observation that temperatures are increasing during summer. That's what's shown here. We've been doing a lot of work using satellites to get temperature data, which is incredibly accurate. You can get a reading every single day of the year with satellites. And what we've noticed is that our winter temperatures are not changing much. Our spring temperatures are not changing much, but the trend for summer is strong. It's also strong for fall, but here I'm just emphasizing summer. And we've seen this in multiple ecosystems across the East End. Moving on now away from temperature to measurements of total nitrogen. So last year was the first time we measured total nitrogen. We've been doing a lot of talking of nitrogen, and some of the trustees, got to the point where we're saying, well, let's look at the nitrogen levels and let's measure it up and see what it actually looks like at different locations. And that's what this data is here. Again, you're looking at the average during summer, and the maximum value. And so, and I put a dashed line there at 0.4 milligrams per liter. And because that is the standard that the Peconic Estuary Program set for protecting seagrasses in their 2001 Comprehensive Management Program. And frankly, this data to me was surprising. And the fact of the matter that almost every location exceeded that standard. And if you break out looking at individual measurements, in some cases, the mean was thrown off by an individual high measurement. Now, as I wanted to point out, and I failed to do so, so I'm just going to go back and emphasize that these are not willy-nilly measurements. My laboratory has what's known as Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program certification by the New York State Department of Health. And we only have that for a few things. We only measure a few things that are certified. And I'll just say this is a very painstaking process to get that certification. One of the things we are certified for is total nitrogen. So I have 100% confidence in the numbers we're generating here. But again, looking at this data, you can see there were spikes for many locations on occasion. And I attribute this to the fact that if we maybe were sampling a little bit deeper, we might be less likely and less prone to getting such samples. And so for the sites where there was just a singular measurement that jumped above, well, maybe that's not too high. But as we move into a place like Northwest Creek or the southern location for Hog Creek, where it's not a fluke, it's almost half the measurements are high. So you can see those are the ones that are definitely solidly above that standard. And as we move into Accabonac Harbor, for sure, this is Louse Point. This is back towards Pussy's Pond and Shipyard Lane, and this is more to the north. You can see these two locations for sure are solidly above that standard. And again, for 3 Mile Harbor, for sure the head of the harbor is certainly consistently above that. But on average, almost all of them were above. And so I think this warrants looking into this more carefully and getting a little bit more information, both in the total nitrogen. That's just one measurement. There's many other sub-pools of nitrogen we could measure within that to get a better handle on what the implications are. Looking at oxygen, these are static measures of oxygen we just make during the day. And I have up there 2 different standards set by the DEC. And, by and large, these numbers look perfectly fine. Almost in all cases, we're above the standard. But what gets interesting is when you begin to explore the day-night cycle. And I'm showing that here. And if we look at that day-night cycle, for example, here for 3 Mile Harbor. Now, the data going back 2 slides for 3 Mile Harbor, things look just fine. But we're measuring this during the day when there's lots of photosynthesis and the oxygen levels are quite high. When we put out a logger that's measuring things all of the time, what we see is that essentially once you get to the month of July, every night there's what I call nocturnal hypoxia. And that goes on. You can see essentially the whole time we had a relief here. This might have been associated with I can't remember when that tropical storm that we had was, whether it was early August or later August, but by and large, for most of the summer, nocturnal hypoxia for most of July and August. And surprisingly, we had a couple of what I thought were aberrant observations in Nat Peak Harbor in 2019 that led to a follow-up here where we had a probe out that was measuring things every few minutes. And what was shown there is that actually a very similar scenario, a lot of nocturnal hypoxia and occurrences of oxygen getting down, in many cases, many observations below what we call that chronic threshold, and also violations of the acute threshold, which I would have never imagined with Nat Peak Harbor being, one of the least developed water bodies in East Hampton. But, this suggests to me that there's probably that water is not moving and flushing the way maybe it had in the past. Moving on to total algae, that's shown here. I'm just going to take a quick half moment here. I just got to adjust something in the way I'm presenting this. I do apologize for this, but it's going to make my life much easier. Just going to do this. Sorry about that, folks. Coming right back right now. This is going to be much better now. Sorry about that. Okay. So to get to the levels of chlorophyll, which is a proxy for total algae, that's shown here. In general, things look good with some spikes in places like Accabonac Harbor and also head of the harbor and 3 Mile Harbor. And if we look at the time series, we see that there were occasions through summer, particularly late summer, as you can see a buildup in the levels of total algae. And in some cases, we know exactly why this is. I'll show momentarily that this is associated with rust tide. And just as a reminder, this is something I've shown before, but these high levels of algae correlate with the amount of nitrogen being loaded into the water body, and also the amount of nitrogen that's coming specifically from wastewater. But to get into the precise types of algae that we're seeing, and starting with Alexandrium, in happy news, the levels of Alexandrium were not high in East Hampton in 2020. So that's good news for sure. We do know, however, that there can be a lot of variability. So this is what it looked like in 2020, but just pulling out a 3-year period here where we had an event that was enough to make shellfish toxic in 2013, but bracketed by years with almost no algae, even though 2012 was a year where there was an event in Sag Harbor that closed down the shellfish beds, and then lower levels in 2014. So, this is, given the severity of this algae, it's something that it's worth continuing to monitor. On the rust tide front, in 2020, we had a significant event in Accabonac Harbor. You can see for 2 of the 3 locations, high levels that we consider anything above 300 cells per milliliter, high enough to cause actually a fish kill or have an effect on shellfish. We exceeded that level in 2 locations in Accabonac Harbor and approached it for Hog Creek. What's interesting is if you look at the year before, again, showing the variability of this particular algae, it got over that threshold in Hog Creek in 2019 and got way over it in Northwest Creek in 2019. So there is a lot of variability with this particular organism. I just want to take a moment to talk about these rust tides because they have been a chronic issue in East Hampton. And just going back here, we've had them in 3 Mile Harbor, we've had it in Hog Creek, everywhere but Napeague, frankly. So this is all over. It seems to bounce around from year to year. But I just want to take a moment to just emphasize, again, this is an ichthyotoxic algae. We've also known, it's very well known to be harmful and actually lethal to bivalves. We know that this particular rust tide is promoted by high levels of nitrogen. There's a paper published almost 10 years ago now, but just showing that it benefits from nitrogen more so than other types of algae. And another paper we published more recently showing that with that warming that's occurring, because this is a particular bloom that happens in the summer, that summer warming has really changed the story with this rust tide. So if you went back 10 years ago, we didn't have these events. Well, maybe that's our quote. 15 years ago, we didn't have these events. But we've warmed into a new era now where this is showing the hot spot here shows that we're in almost the bullseye for the region that's warmed right into the ideal zone for this particular species. This is how many days per year the bloom season for this species has changed since 1982, with the upshot being that you're getting almost 2 additional days of a bloom season per year. You add that up, and what this equates to is that we had, maybe a week or so of a bloom season, and now it's more than a month. And so what I just want to emphasize, and you'll see what I'm getting at here, but when you think about warming temperatures, rising levels of nitrogen, these are the things that promote these rust tides, and these things are harmful to bivalves and specifically to scallops. Now, I don't have time to go into details, but when you have warmer water, you also have lower oxygen. And that's also an issue. And the last thing I'll just mention is that beyond these things like oxygen and temperature and harmful algal blooms, we also know there's a looming threat of what we call ocean acidification. This is a paper that was just published looking at bay scallops and hard clams. There's a lot to look at here. But essentially, this was a modeler we gave. I worked with Steve Tettelbach and Jason Greer, did his PhD at Yale. He's now working for EPA. He took the data that we had generated to understand what's the stability of these bivalve populations under normal conditions, which is the solid line, and under conditions of what we call ocean acidification. And so the bay scallop had a pretty good chance for the next 20 years of being somewhat stable, whereas if you just add in a small amount of acidification, it had a pretty good chance of not doing well at all. And in fact, almost 100% chance of collapsing by more than 50%. So I'm not saying we've identified what's led to the scallop die-off, but I do want to point out that when you add in these things like rising summer temperatures, lower oxygen, annual rust tides, sensitivity to ocean acidification. Also, research at Sternberg has shown there's a parasite that is also in the scallops that maybe does better under all of these conditions. These are all things that are likely contributing to that decline of the scallop population. And I'll just finally put out there, some people have put out the theory that, well, maybe there's not enough food in the bays to feed the scallops. And the one thing we can say for sure is that level of food has not changed in the last 2 years. It's no different than it was in the years when the scallops were doing great. I'm going to move on now to talk about indicator bacterium and start with fecal coliform bacterium, which we're measuring. You can see the levels here for different water bodies. And specifically for this year, we focused on these 4 water bodies: Accabonac Harbor, Hog Creek, 3 Mile Harbor, and Northwest Creek. And so what you can see here is this is the standard for shell fishing, and most locations are above that. Now that's not, when I show some maps, that won't necessarily be surprising. If we look at, these are averages though, on average, and also the maximum. If we look at the time course, you can see some locations are chronically below the threshold, whereas other ones are often above that threshold. And remember, I'm going to also talk about where these bacteria are coming from, the microbial source tracking. And again, similar sort of story in 3 Mile Harbor. You can see Accabonac Harbor more commonly over for most locations, 3 Mile Harbor, maybe a little bit better, and Northwest Creek, maybe in between. But overall, we look at all these locations and compare to the DEC status. In general, we're seeing that what we find confirms the status of the shellfish beds as declared by the DEC. And again, the conditions that the DEC set up are not static. So they're monitoring as well. And sometimes they're making changes based on what they find. And so, for example, the whole northern half of Northwest Creek was open to seasonal shellfishing in 2014 as a change for the DEC. Our measurements confirm that was the right call, and that there's that could be open for seasonal shellfishing. Again, just turning to 3 Mile Harbor, for 2 of our sites, we had levels that were consistent with what the DEC said. But we did have some samples in this particular area off of Gann Road that were above that threshold, despite the fact that it's open to shellfishing. So more on that momentarily. Since we were doing a deep dive into the bacteria, we also looked at Enterococcus, which is considered by the DOH for swimming. And you can see here, again, like the fecal coliform bacteria, fairly high levels in Accabonac Harbor and Hog Creek, with levels being lower in 3 Mile Harbor and Northwest Creek. And again, just talking about Accabonac Harbor, it was high for the Enterococcus for swimming. It was high for the fecal coliform bacteria. And it's mostly closed to shellfishing except for this zone here. And just to call out, the places we're sampling are as an area that's chronically closed, seasonally closed, and also seasonally closed. So it's sort of consistent there. But of course, we still want to know where the bacteria are coming from. And that's why we've been using the microbial source tracking, which I'm going to get into now. This technique has been very valuable. Analytically, it's proven to be more effective than I would have imagined when we began using it. And that the measurements that we're making with digital PCR correlate well with measurements being made by more standard processes. So look at what we found with this technique in 2020. Here are the results I'll start with 3 Mile Harbor and Northwest Creek. And I'll get into what the absolute percentages are here, but you can see it's a little bit of a time series. And you can see, just to look at 3 Mile Harbor, some times when the levels are spiking in these different locations. The blue, and I made the mistake. I didn't put up the legend here, so that doesn't really help you very much. So I'm gonna have to interpret it for you. My apologies. The blue is human-based derived bacteria. The yellow is from birds. The orange is from deer. The gray is from small mammals and dogs. And it's a serious faux pas to not have it on this figure. I do apologize. But I'll walk you through it and emphasize that, again, the blue is the human source. And so just for background, we've done 3 Mile Harbor before. This is our first time doing Northwest Creek. But in general, what we're finding is that in most locations, the biggest source is usually animal-derived, either being dogs/small mammals, that's the gray, or birds, which is the yellow here. It's aberrant when we see the blue, the human-derived. Because, just again, I said this before, but as a reminder, septic tanks are typically not a source so long as there's even just a little bit of separation between the septic tank and groundwater, because you just need about 500 feet of flow through sand to remove bacteria. They consider our aquifers a sand filter. So what you can see here, spikes in bacteria, both in the Gann Road site and also the head of the harbor from human-derived. And I'll note that these are locations with a plethora of marinas around them. So some of these spikes, we believe, are coming from boats, whereas the animal-derived is likely coming from road runoff. But again, some of these are really leading to the levels far beyond what you call the background. In Accabonac Harbor, the situation is slightly different. And Hog Creek as well. Again, you have the dominance of animal-derived bacteria. So again, just a reminder, we're looking at small mammals and dogs in the gray, birds in the yellow, deer in the orange. The blue is that human signal. And so it was a little surprising to see that human signal at Site 5. This is Louse Point. Originally, we would say, well, maybe this is a septic tank or around in that particular area. And if it was just a one-off, maybe we would say, well, it just so happens. But you can see 3 out of 4 samples had elevated levels. I don't know much about what goes on there, but I do know that there are some boats in that area that may or may not be contributing. There may be something else going on, but the fact that this is repeated and quite different from the other parts of Accabonac Harbor has me thinking that this is a real trend. But here's the overall on average results as a percentage. This is maybe easier to look at, and happily, I do have the legend there, so you don't have to guess at what it is. And so you can see again, the sites near marinas and or boats seem to have that human signal, whereas other sites are dominated by animals. And, actually, you should see even the sites with the human signal, the dominance is from animal-derived bacteria, birds, and then in some cases, to a lesser extent, the small mammals and dog signal. Again, the preponderance of the marinas driving, seemingly boats driving that human signal. To move on to some freshwater bodies, so I'm going to focus on the freshwater bodies now. Just as a reminder, these are the ones that we've been sampling. And I'll start with salinity, which is kind of interesting. We call these freshwater, and clearly Wainscott Pond is truly fresh. But Hook Pond has a little bit of salt in it, I guess for some ocean overwash. Fresh Pond is definitely a brackish system. In fact, when we first started sampling it, its salinity was actually quite high. And we all know Georgica Pond is temporarily open / temporarily closed. It's the northern extent of it that stays fairly low salinity. Looking at oxygen levels, as far as just chronic measurements, you can see here that in general, on average, oxygen levels are good, with the exception maybe that the northern extent of Georgica Pond. You can see here that even if we measure during the day, many of the measurements there fall at least below the chronic standard by the DEC. And then in the southern extent of Georgica Pond, these are chronic measurements of dissolved oxygen. And like I showed you for some of the other patterns, we did see those levels dipping down below the standards, particularly during late summer. I'm going to talk more about that momentarily. And we did measure total nitrogen for these water bodies, and the levels were quite high. But I should mention that 0.4 doesn't apply to freshwater bodies. That was a marine standard. So it's up there, but it's just as a reference point. Turns out the levels that the EPA sets for chlorophyll in freshwater bodies is more restrictive than what you get for marine water bodies. You can see that here, and that you've got every location on average going above that standard. And of course, the algae we worry most about in freshwater systems are blue-green algae. And this is what Georgica Pond looked like in less happy days. I believe this is from 2015. But here you can see the levels of blue-green algae across all the sites that we sampled in 2020. And what it basically shows is that blue-green algae were not an issue in Fresh Pond or Hook Pond or really Georgica Pond, never exceeding the threshold for levels of blue-green algae. But Fort Pond and Montauk and Wainscott Pond being different stories. Now in Fort Pond, the scenario is that the blue-green algae show up and are there for most of the summer. And it was just in late summer, really in August, that they just creeped above the New York State DEC threshold for levels of blue-green algae. But Wainscott Pond in 2020 was a different situation. I'll point out here that in 2019, we had, and this is just re-showing what I showed last year for 2019, this is the blue-green algae then. The levels of blue-green algae were above that DEC standard on a few occasions. It popped above it in June, and then again in July for a little bit, and then again in August. But the thing that was most concerning is that before 2019, this toxin that the blue-green algae make, microcystin, was really never above 2 micrograms per liter in Wainscott Pond. So it was really surprising when we got measurements of 4 and then 8 in 2019. But 2020 really gave new perspective in that, firstly, we didn't have a single measurement in 2020 where Wainscott Pond was below the DEC standard for blue-green algae. And I should just emphasize, this is on a log scale. So some of these measurements here, or many of these measurements, are in the hundreds. The standard is 25 micrograms per liter. And so, like I said, from when we started in June to when we wrapped it up in November, every single observation was above that standard. And probably more concerning is that the levels of toxin were unlike anything we'd ever seen in Wainscott Pond. So remember, I just showed you that in 2019, I started getting worried and we saw a 4 and an 8. In 2020, once we hit July, we were above 20 micrograms per liter for the rest of the year. And I have this set that went from September into October that we're still trying to get the right numbers for because it blew the curve twice during the analyses. And I'm putting for reference in here what the EPA sets as its recreational guideline, 8 micrograms per liter. And the DEC, will put out a specific warning if you go above 20 micrograms per liter of microcystin. And again, above that for July, August, September, and October. So that was really surprising. And so clearly things in Wainscott Pond, year by year, I almost made the plot, but I'll just say it, that it's gone from, levels of microcystin where you could have drank the water in 2016, at least just based on just microcystin, to levels that you're in a whole nother whole other solar system here in 2020. So we'll
Chris, do you think those numbers that have continued to deteriorate because you weren't testing before that, could that be residual benefits of the overwash back in Sandy?
Possible. It's possible. Yeah, it's hard to know because we don't have the before to be able to say that. But I will just mention that I put working with the consultant PW Grosser, there is a proposal before the CPF committee that the trustees endorsed to do a study of the sediments in Wainscott Pond with the ultimate end goal of being able to pull out the muddy sediments in the bottom of the pond that are likely a strong nutrient source for these events. And now to move on, I think that the last thing to present is on Georgica Pond. And just to move through, we know Georgica Pond is a temporarily open and closed estuary, just moving into some data there. Firstly, based on the Enterococcus, I'll note here that on average, the pond is swimmable for the larger part of the pond. So this is over at Hill Cove, this is Georgica Cove, but not, it's above that standard. And this has been shown year after year on Route 27 there. And, the fact that that's a place where people are putting in things like kayaks and paddle boards, well, that's probably a little problematic. But one significant event in 2020, this is what Georgica Cove looked like during July. You already saw that at this time when this was happening, the oxygen levels started falling in the main part of Georgica Pond, just starting to get below that 3 milligrams per liter. When we started seeing this, we put an oxygen sensor out in Georgica Cove, and you can see that site was not only going to low oxygen, but getting to anoxic at night as well with the overgrowth of these macrophytes. As it turns out, when you see this, this is actually the signal that those macrophytes are actually dying off. But we worked, the trustees and myself and the Friends of Georgia Pond worked with the DEC to be able to launch an aquatic weed harvester, which was then put in to try to remove some of those macroalgae and improve the conditions. This is what has already been done. It had been done for a 3-year period from 2016 to 2018. As a reminder, during that period, there was nearly 200,000 pounds of macrophytes removed. And in multiple years, this was up to 20% of the nitrogen and phosphorus load, at least during summer. And once this is implemented, I'll point out that before this use, the blue-green algae were intense. But once it was used, the system's been kind of under control when it comes to blue-green algae. And beyond removing a nitrogen and phosphorus source and removing something before it decays, when you see these algae are going to be releasing nitrogen and phosphorus into the water as they're dying off. Another concern that came to light just 2 weeks ago was this study that was published in the journal Science. You can see the title, Hunting the Eagle Killer. Cyanobacterial neurotoxin causes vacuolar, I don't even know how to pronounce that, but an affliction within bald eagles. And the fact they've been having to die off of bald eagles in the Midwest. And through some incredible science, and if you want to read a scientific mystery novel, and you're a scientist, this is the way they decoded this was unbelievable. Because what they figured out is the reason that for the degradation of the brain tissue within the eagles was that there was actually a blue-green algae growing on pondweed in the middle of multiple freshwater bodies by a type of cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, that had not previously been identified, making a toxin that had not been previously identified, but it growing up on those macrophytes, and then that toxin cycling through the food chain and ultimately up to the eagles. And you don't get a paper published in Science unless your science is fail safe. And the work that was done here was amazing. And I just point this out as another benefit of removing those macrophytes. In addition to getting the nitrogen, phosphorus out and potentially leading to low blue-green algae, you could be removing potentially detrimental cyanobacteria. And there also seems to be an oxygen benefit, and that the summer oxygen levels were highest during those years that the harvester were in use. The final thing I'm going to just talk about here is a study we did in the fall of the opening of the cut. You may recall over the last several years, I've pointed out that when you open that cut, has had negative consequences for oxygen levels. And so what we did is we went into and tried to take a closer look at the dynamics of the opening of the cut, the changes in oxygen, and the changes in salinity within the pond. So what you're looking at here is our data from the main buoy. And this is a pattern quite similar to what we've seen before, actually a little bit more intense. And so what you're looking at is that the cut was open on October 19th, in about the middle of the day. And so that once that happens, the water and I'm sure people have been there know this, it all flushes out. And once it's all flushed out, then the ocean water can start coming in with the tides. And as we've seen in the past, once that starts, and actually it looks like a little bit before that starts, the oxygen levels start declining. And it was quite severe in 2020 in October. You can see with almost 3 days of what we would call, 2 days of zero oxygen or anoxic conditions. And then it came back thereafter. We looked at multiple sites in the cove. So we had 6 stations. 1 is the northern extent, 1 through 4 is through the main thrust of the pond, 5 and 6 is in the cove. These are the salinity levels before the opening of the cut on the 19th, and then after on the 20th. And so just to show, the salinity signal is clearly observable with 24 hours after the opening of the cut, but it doesn't reach the cove nor the northern extent at that point in time. we also put out more oxygen loggers. And what we saw there was pretty interesting in that we picked up, again, anoxia occurring, but quite different in these other locations. And that instead of it just dropping and staying pinned at 0, we saw the onset of these day-night cycles, as we've talked about before. And so this leads me to suspect that part of the story here is that that buoy we have is over the hole in the southeast corner of Georgia Cove. I think that hole gets anoxic, and I think that the sensor is going into that anoxic water as the water levels go down. It's more than just that, because you can see we're having 0 oxygen at night in other locations, but it's clearly not as severe. And so I think there's multiple things going on there. The other interesting thing is that this onset of the low oxygen continued for almost 5 days, which is longer than what we saw for the buoy. Maybe partly because the buoy is closer to the cut. And then again, we did our survey of before and after, and looking for the locations where we could see the oxygen signal. And so interestingly, the salinity didn't change in the cove, but we did see a decrease in oxygen levels, suggesting that it's more than just the ocean water that's affecting this, and certainly saw it near the buoy as well. And then the final piece of the puzzle here, and I'm actually done after this slide, is the fact that you may recall the cut closed, so it wasn't an ideal opening in late October, and it was recut open in November. And we saw a similar pattern there. Now the salinity wasn't as low. You can see it went from 18 back to ocean salinity, but we did get an oxygen decrease, but again, not of the severity that we saw with the first cut. So I'm done. I'm just going to wrap up with some statements here that, for example, summer water temperatures are rising in East Hampton, causing additional stress on organisms like bivalves and seagrasses. The total nitrogen levels in East Hampton waters exceeded the Peconic Estuary standard for seagrass that was in the Comprehensive Management Plan from 2001. We saw, again, nocturnal hypoxia in the head of 3 Mile Harbor, but also surprisingly also cropping up on a nightly basis in Napeague for part of the summer, Napeague Harbor. Accabonac Harbor had the most intense rust tide in 2020, but these events move around, and in fact, they've hit nearly every water body over the last several years. While animal-derived bacteria dominated most of the locations, it did seem that boats were likely contributing at 2 of the sites in 3 Mile Harbor, specifically Gann Road and the head of the harbor, and also seemingly near Laos Point in Accabonac Harbor. The levels of algae in all the freshwater bodies exceeded the US EPA standard, but the ones we worry most about, the blue-green algae, were over the state standard in Wainscott Pond and Fort Pond, and as I showed you, Wainscott Pond was at a whole new level in 2020. I showed you that Georgia Pond water quality has improved since the onset of the harvester. We in fact haven't had any blue-green algae blooms since then. And that fall cut certainly does cause hypoxia and anoxia in multiple locations across the pond. With that, I'm done, and I'd like to thank the trustees for supporting this study. And I think it's the information that we're able to jointly put together here, I think, is incredibly informative for East Hampton Town and for managing these water bodies. And of course, I'd like to thank the Friends of Georgia Pond, who really supported some of the extended studies that were done there, and then people from my lab group who helped make this all possible. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Chris, the low oxygen levels in the coves immediately post the cut, could that possibly be the fact that you got basically the hydrostatic pressure drops and that sort of hypoxic water that maybe is held in the underground water table gets drawn out into these coves post the cut with the water levels dropping? I mean,
yeah, I think that's a big part of it. In another parallel aspect that is hard probably to decouple the two, in the cove, it gets very shallow there also. So,
Yeah.
The sediments themselves, the muddy sediments, can also be a big draw of oxygen. And so now you've got just a little bit of water or a lot less water than you had in a water body that's lined with mud that actually can suck the oxygen out of the water. So I think it's probably a little bit of both. But we do know that the oxygen levels in the groundwater as the pond fills up can decline, and when it's stagnant. So what you're saying is on point.
I have a question. You mentioned about Northwest Harbor Creek and also Napeague, because Napeague, to my knowledge, has been one of the cleanest bodies of water. And I'm wondering if that has anything to do with the necessity to dredge those bodies of water. Would that increase the quality of water?
Yeah, I mean, we what I haven't measured is tidal flushing rates, but certainly I've spoken with trustees Aldred and also with Rick Drew and others about I guess the inlet location has changed in Napeague Harbor, and I don't know the rate at which it's flushing, but given the relatively pristine watershed. The only explanation for the nocturnal hypoxia there is that the water is not moving very much, and therefore leading to potentially at night the low oxygen levels.
Right. Those are two projects actually that we are talking about moving forward to do. So I did hear, if the water's not moving, it's just stagnant, then that would create what we're seeing, I imagine. So. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to talk more about this, what we're going to go forward later on in the week with you, but I'm just wondering for the public now, what you might recommend in general, more testing in Napeague, more monitoring of that water and Northwest Creek?
Yeah, I mean, certainly more information will be able to address, will get you a better answer as you try to move towards solutions. I think, again, in Napeague, I think having the one thing I'll say about Napeague is that if it were really closing terribly, we would see that also in the salinity signal. But it is getting the water in there, but, clearly not as much as it maybe has in the past or would have ideally.
It seems that it's more temperature related, the issues in Napeague Harbor.
Hey, Dr. Gobler, it's Rick. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. I have a general Peconic Bay estuary question for you. I think it goes back to about 1985 when the eelgrass and scallops crashed. Shellfishing really began to decline around that time. So it's been, 36 years, maybe a little more, and the bay has struggled. There's really very few successful sites for eelgrass. There's a few and some patches of shellfish here and there. Year over year, your reports are showing strong evidence for nitrogen and water temperatures, probably the main culprits in this problem. And do you still support this theory, and are there any new thoughts that are coming to light based on these, great studies and reports you've been doing? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, temperature and nitrogen loading that initiates the cascade of events is certainly has an additive impact on any marine organism. And, I can just mention as an aside from years of study of bay scallops in my laboratory, they're the most sensitive of all the bivalves, partly because they grow so quickly. So, once they end, particularly in their second year, the year that you would harvest them, they have incredible rates. Their metabolism is just going super fast because they grow so quickly in just 2 years. To go from a larva to a large bivalve that you harvest. And so because of that rapid rate of metabolism, when things are slightly off, like the temperatures get too warm, well, that's going to kick up their metabolism. And if the oxygen levels are just slightly too low, well, that's going to make them, respire even more. And then, as I mentioned, you throw in other things like rust tide, or maybe the onset of some acidification, and all these things have additive effects. And then finally, I'll mention, there's a parasite in the scallops as well. There's no evidence to suggest that that's contributing, but it may be.
Okay, thank you. Any thoughts on any new directions that you're going to try to take your work that might address some of these things, or are we still in the formulation phase?
Well, I think we're going to talk about it later in the week, but I'd be happy that we could, I think were there interest in it, there a couple of things to consider. One would just be more intensive sampling in particular locations or over time. But, there could be collaborative work with the hatchery, for example, whereby, if they're going to be growing out shellfish, we could be doing some intense environmental monitoring in parallel and evaluate the success of the bivalve outplants in the light of environmental conditions, for example.
Yeah.
Right. We were talking about that at our recent harbor management meeting that we had. So, yeah, when you meet with the Water Quality Committee, please continue that discussion.
Yeah.
That's, I think, a direction there's a lot of interest in. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Do we have any callers that are looking to ask questions at this point?
There was one in the beginning of the meeting.
There's one caller on the line, yes.
Well, let's maybe give somebody an opportunity. They've been waiting quite a while here.
Yes, I'll unmute that caller now.
Hello?
Hello, caller, you're on.
Hello. Okay, thank you. This is Matt Mallow. We live at 40 LaForest Lane, which is on the Cove. And we appreciate the trustees' concern and Dr. Gobler's concern about water quality. But we and our neighbors, and you, the trustees as well, have been concerned about water flow and water quantity. The height of the cove, which, as Dr. Gobler has pointed out, when the cut is open, goes down to very, very, very low levels, and the cove becomes, at the north end particularly, a swamp. So the trustees have authorized dredging at the neck of the cove where the pond and the cove meet. That's very helpful. But I guess I have two questions that derive from Dr. Gobler's report as well as observation. One is Phragmites tend to limit water flow, and there's been substantial Phragmite growth throughout the cove, as we all know, particularly at the neck where the cove meets the pond. 19 Chauncey Close is a construction site as we speak, and might provide an opportunity to bring a mechanical harvester in with a long arm to harvest Phragmites from the trustee land, not the private land. That's private owners have to do that, but from the trustee land. So the question I have for the trustees is there a Phragmite plan for that? And have you thought about the possibility of asking the landowner to allow access to his land while it's under construction?
Mr. Mallow, to speak to your question about 19 and 23 Chauncey Close, I guess you haven't really been over there because there is no Phragmites either on those properties or out in front of those properties. Those Phragmites were all cut as part of a permit this past winter. There is a 5-year management plan there where the Phragmites is going to be removed via cutting, as opposed to what was done over at your property with the excavation some years ago. And there is a very, very robust vegetated buffer and planting plan in place over there. As far as what the trustees are doing with respect to removing Phragmites on their property, in cooperation and funded by the Friends of Georgia just a year ago, the bottleneck close to your place, we call it the north bottleneck, was enlarged. And this past winter, the bottleneck at the south end of Georgia Cove was excavated, and there was about 900 cubic yards of sand removed from that area. So in as much as the water levels, yes, when the pond is let or low in front of your place, that's more or less a natural event there. And one of the reasons that the dredging work was done a year or so ago at the north bottleneck by your place was the fact that when the pond was let, the water tended to become impounded up in that area and would stagnate. And the whole goal of that was to get a nice tidal flush when the pond was let, when the pond was open to the ocean. But as far as the trustees doing Phragmites removal wholesale on their bottomland, as you yourself know, we issue permits. And I think you still have an intact permit over there with both us and the DEC for the cutting of Phragmites in front of your place.
Hey, Jim, it's Rick. Can I weigh in for 1 second? I just wanted to add that, every project that is trustee permitted gets an annual review. There's a portfolio of photos and a narrative prepared by the applicant or the agent. And we do site visits to every property that has a trustee permit to make sure that the guidelines of the permit are being followed and things like upland buffers are being planted. So we've put a lot of time into this over the past 5 years, and we're really proud of the program. And thank you for presenting the question.
Jim and Rick, I appreciate and applaud the trustee effort with respect to removal of Phragmites. The question was a much more narrow one than the answer, which was there is substantial Phragmite growth on trustee bottomland. That's undeniable. And the question I really have is what's the plan for doing that? But my second question, which really is Dr. Gobler, the end of your report was a bit confusing to me because you suggested that the oxygen levels in the cove went down substantially when the cut was opened, while the salinity gradually increased. Are you suggesting, and that the fall opening of the cut was detrimental to the cove at least, and maybe the pond? Are you suggesting that the trustees rethink the fall opening that they traditionally do?
No. Well, yes and no. Yes, there is just through scientific discovery, it's just a fact. The oxygen levels drop initially when the cut is open. But those oxygen levels are restored within 24 hours, depending, or 24 to 72 hours. And so yes, initially there is that short-term negative consequence. But the long-term benefit is clear, because having that cut open does eventually flush out everything, and it actually offsets a lot of the nitrogen loading. I've done the math that shows the nitrogen loads need to be reduced to Georgia Pond. If you keep that cut open for an extended period, essentially have it open at least 6 to 8 months per year, that means you need to do less of a nitrogen reduction. And so, it's a little bit of short-term negative consequences, but I think that those are offset by the big picture benefit. But we're simply trying to understand why is it that opening the cut does have that initial negative effect, and if once we understand the mechanism, can there be something done to mitigate any of that?
Chris, I have a question about the oxygen levels as the cuts are made. Do you have any information from other coastal ponds about that?
Yeah, we saw something similar in Sagaponic Pond this past summer, actually. Both that and Mecox are slightly different because of the they're open. I think they're more apt to be open during the summer as opposed to Georgia, which is traditionally October 15th. But there was evidence of an oxygen dip. We had a buoy installed in Sagaponic Pond this past summer, and we did see a similar dip in oxygen with that occurrence. Now, it wasn't as severe, but again, it's hard. You can't draw perfect parallels because, obviously each system is different.
Dr. Gobler, if the oxygen level is diminished for a period of 24 to 72 hours, that cuts off oxygen to things that are growing on the bottomlands. And I know that the Friends of Georgica, I have a picture of it when we walked the property with Jim several weeks ago, Sarah and myself and Jim. They have, they're growing oysters as an experiment in the pond. And I'm wondering then if they have no oxygen for that period of time, does that cause living creatures to die off as a result?
Yeah, so certainly that's another reason we're looking into this as well. And so, I can say that 2 years ago, there was actually a fish kill coincident with the opening. But what we learned this year is that while there is low oxygen throughout the pond, that it seems to be less severe in locations away from that hole. And so that the data from the hole, again, I'm starting to get the interpretation, and we're going to follow up and hopefully get more information in 2021, but that the sensor is actually going down into the hole as the water levels go out, and that's partly it's measuring what's down in there. But that's not the only story, because we definitely got to anoxic levels in the north and in the cove, but they were not chronic. They were, ephemeral. And so, the oysters, at least we know, survive that and can deal with the short periods of time. Whereas, an earlier life stage animal, and again, we saw the fish kill with these small sort of killifish, they're more sensitive.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any more questions for Dr. Gobler?
There are no additional callers on the line.
I just have one question, Chris. The nitrogen spikes that you saw, do you have any other possible explanation besides basically passing sewage, which seemed to be what you felt might be a cause of those?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't just thinking in the lines of sewage. I think it also could be, for example, if there was a piece of seaweed that broke off and happened to get into the sample, and you didn't necessarily notice it. If that ended up in the vial that you analyzed, that could lead to high levels. And in shallower water, you're more likely to get that. And the other thing I didn't mention, but maybe this goes along with it, if there was a big rainfall event in the 24 hours prior, that also could be a contributing factor.
Chris, do you do any correlation between rainfall or that in your testing to draw those parallels when you do when you're doing?
Yes, we've done that in the past. We did that to some extent for 2020 as well.
Yeah, because I did notice that spike at the southeast end in Napeague Harbor. I think it was on like the 22nd of July. What could have caused that? Because yes, there is development over in that area, but it's also an area that, I wouldn't cause the development dense, and and most of the properties don't have lawns. Some of the usual contributing factors, like we see along Georgica Pond, don't really exist there.
Yeah, agreed.
What was a little curious to me was that the spikes were at different times in different places.
Yeah.
And, if it was, say, a rainfall event, you might think.
Seen it across the board, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it may just be a factor of sampling. I can say that I'm, like I said earlier, 100% confidence in the analysis, both the fact that we have the certification, but when I saw the numbers, I instantly asked that they be rerun, and we got the same value. So there was no doubt in the actual numbers. But we can, I think we can think about how we might go about the sampling for those different in 2020. We might see the same exact thing for all I know, but we'll find out.
Yeah. I haven't noticed any additional boating traffic down at Louse Point, but the beach has become a much more popular swimming area. Could that be responsible for the human spike?
Well, that was the first time we actually sampled there. So I don't, it's not like the year prior we had 2 samples. We had, we were in the eastern extent, the Pussy's Pond, and then the extension there out into the main part of the harbor. So we didn't sample Louse Point before this year. So I have nothing to compare it to.
Okay.
But frankly, I would I think your intuition as to the most likely culprit is probably better than mine, frankly.
Yeah. Oh, we're going to do that area again this year. We're going to talk about that, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're going to talk about it.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions for Dr. Goldblum? No? Well, Chris, I want to thank you for a riveting report. I know it's kept us all on the edge of our seats, and we appreciate it.
Okay.
And I'm not just breaking your chops.
You would never do that. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank
We'll
you.
see you soon. Thank
you.
you very much for coming this evening.
All
Thank
right.
you, Doc.
We have some issues of new business that we'll need to vote on. The first of which is the South Fork Wind Draft Fisheries Study Work Plan. I think we have Milla on, who's going to present, and John, if you can.
Yeah. So I don't know, it's up to you guys. I don't know at this time if this is something that needs to be put to a vote just yet. The draft that I circulated the other day is just that, it's a draft. So as you guys will recall, can you hear me?
Yes.
So one of the certificate conditions in the Article 7 permit approval for the South Fork Wind Project was a requirement that Ørsted put together a 5-year study to examine the impacts that the project construction might have on nearshore and offshore fisheries and just the marine environment in general. So a special task force was put together to help draft this work plan. Notably, it included representatives from the Stony Brook University, Cornell Cooperative Extension, New York DEC, New York DPS, and then John Aldred and myself participated in all the meetings where individuals from these organizations got together to talk about what sort of components of a study would be needed, how long the study should run for, who would be available to conduct the study, and that sort of thing. So I don't know if you've had the chance to review the work plan, but essentially it lays out a comprehensive 5-year review, including 2 years of pre-construction studies, 1 year of study, 1 year during construction examination, and then 2 years post-construction. So we should have a really clear picture of what the marine environment looked like before this project started, what happened while construction and things like, pile driving and horizontal drilling were going on, and then what things look like after. So does the ecosystem rebound? Do you change migration patterns, that sort of thing? We should, at the end of this, have a really comprehensive picture of what an offshore wind project might do to an ecosystem. So at a high level, the study is mainly comprised of an acoustic telemetry and then trawl survey components. The acoustic telemetry should begin almost immediately, that sometime this spring. If you go to page 21 of the work plan, there's a timeline that outlines exactly when the work will start and how it will be carried out in phases thereafter. And then same thing with the trawl survey component. If you go down to one of the last pages in the report, it outlines all of the steps for that work. So John Aldred and I have gone through this study in great detail, and we also participated in all the meetings leading up to it, and we feel pretty confident in what's in here. We're happy with what was provided. We feel like everyone that was involved made good on their word to put together a really scientifically sound work product. At this point, we were able to pose questions and comments to Orsted itself by close of business today. And then from here, Orsted's actually going to file this draft report as part of the EMNCP. So that will happen on April 20th. And then a formal comment period will commence with the commission that will run for 45 days. So if we have any concerns or like things we think should be included in here or questions to ask, the commission comment period is really the time to raise those. So John and I kind of, when we went through this, we highlighted a few issues that we think we should consider. The first one to pose to this group is, well, let me pause there before I get into the issues. Does anyone have questions about how we got here, what this is, or anything about that?
No, I think, I hope we all understand.
Yeah, we've talked about this for some time. So this is just sort of a certificate condition coming to life.
Milla, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in your timeline of what's coming up, does the full working group meet before the EMNCP is filed? I believe there's a full working group meeting before the EMNCP is filed. Is that true?
I am not sure. You mean with all the stakeholders, including like the commercial fishing industry and
right.
Well,
at any rate, at some point there will be a meeting of the full working group.
Right, definitely. And sort of going off of that, the fisheries working group right now is comprised of the people that I mentioned previously, ourselves, the town, and then Bonnie Brady, along with the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association, is the only representative for recreational or commercial fishing. And I think in seeing the participation that's happened so far, John and I have wondered if maybe we want to try and get any other members to join the group. If the trustees feel like there should be more representation from the fisheries. At one point, John had floated Bob Valenti's name. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, or I wanted to discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, I just introduced that, I guess, with the fact that this question was pretty much brought to us by the inshore fishing community, the dory fishermen off the beach. And Bob Valenti is, he's kind of got his fingers in two pies here. He's vice chair of the Fisheries Advisory Committee. He's very actively involved in the, the matters of the fishery, and works closely with the inshore fishermen. And he also has a PhD in fisheries biology. So I thought he might be a useful addition to the working group to review the work as it takes place.
John, I recently saw Dan Farnham, the son, and he at one point was part of this, I think, wasn't he? And then he told me that Bob Valenti took that spot instead. So isn't he already involved in this, Mr. Valenti?
I'm not sure what you mean. I'm not sure what
Well, there was, I think after Julie Evans, Dan Farnham Jr. was appointed to the position of being the local fishery contact with Orsted.
Well, Bob.
And then now it's Bob.
Bob was never, to my knowledge, was not the fisheries liaison. He's on the Fisheries Advisory Committee, the committee of fishermen that advise the town board as to fisheries matters. Bob is the vice chair of that committee.
Right. Okay. Well, that's what Dan told me. So I thought that Mr. Valenti was already involved in this way. But I will say that the list of working group members and the associations, it's quite extensive. I read the report, and I have to say I want to thank you both very much, John and Mila, for this terrific report. It was fascinating, and I think a lot of research, and it's a comprehensive report, and we really should be very proud of everything that has gone into this. I want to thank you both for all your efforts. Good job.
Yeah. Is any field work actually going on now? Are they going to do any preliminary stuff?
So that's one of the questions I submitted to Ørsted today, is just a precise timeline of exactly what's happening this spring. The chart that was submitted as the draft, part of the draft work plan, just has sort of broad like Q1, Q2, Q3 deliverables. But one of the things that John and I are chiefly concerned with is making sure that there's the complete 2 years of pre-construction review. So we're not missing this migration and all that.
That popped out at me. I don't understand how they're going to have 2 years of preliminary work and start next year.
Well,
They're not starting next year. They're starting now.
I think
The question is, will they have enough time in this period of the year to collect enough data?
All right. If they still, how does this work? I mean, we've got something that was basically tentatively set up to vote on tonight. When does this fishery study or work plan, when does it get formally accepted, and when is the proposed start date on that?
I believe the answer to your first part of your question is when the EM and CP is accepted by the PSC. Or Mila, you would be able to phrase that better than I can.
So basically, it's a little bit strange. So this work plan will not be finalized until the commission approves the EM and CP. But John and I have been sort of pounding the table from the beginning, saying you can't wait that long. You got to get going. You got to prove to us that you're going to have a comprehensive study. We're not going to sign the joint proposal until we see that. Blah blah blah. So it's in our interest for them to start work before it's formally approved, and I think that's likely to happen. But as John pointed out, it won't be a finalized document until the commission signs off on the EMNC.
Okay.
Hey, John, as you know, the migration is kind of underway, so I don't know if you can use that as leverage to explain to them that they really do have to get started because the date is on the table, so to speak.
We've had that conversation more than once, Rick.
Figured as much. Thanks, John.
And I think Ørsted is ready to mobilize. They were just waiting to make sure that this project received its CP and CN, and now that that's happened, they're ready to go. And John and I have also talked to the subject matter experts, and I think to some extent they may be relying on fish that have been tagged previously, but then there's a lot more work that we want to see happen as part of this review as well.
All right. So Mila, if you could just review the public comment date and the timeline on this thing.
Sure. So we submitted a couple of questions and informal comments to Ørsted today. The work plan will be filed as part of the EM&CP on April 20th, and then we will have 45 days from April 20th to submit formal feedback. And then at the close of that 45-day period, the commission will sign off on the EM&CP or take some sort of action, either continue to review it, request supplementary information or approve it.
Okay, so we have some time if there are any other questions that we feel need to be answered. What I would like is any members of our board that have questions, please direct them through John, and I hope that's okay, John.
Yes. Absolutely.
He's been the conduit on this, and realize that the clock is running. So it sounds like we really don't have anything to vote on this evening.
So nothing to vote on. I think there was just one other point that we wanted to raise about this process. So the fisheries study was a really important component of the trustee involvement in the South Fork Wind Project, and something that the public and I think your constituency was very concerned with. And so we just wanted to kind of like start, finding opportunities to show what work is happening and providing updates on the study itself. So this is sort of the first opportunity to do that. And then another thing to highlight is that in the fourth quarter of each year of the 5-year study, there'll be a formal report of the study findings that are issued. And I think that would be another opportunity to present to the public what's going on, and maybe receive any feedback if there's concerns raised at that time. And when John and I spoke, we thought that, the first choice for such a presentation might be the subject matter experts from Stony Brook or Cornell putting together sort of a slide deck and making a special presentation at a trustee meeting. If that's not possible, maybe asking Ørsted to make that presentation. And then as a third choice, preparing something ourselves. But again, just wanted to kind of raise that for you guys and let you discuss amongst yourselves what you think is the best approach.
All right. Do we have a suggestion, in moving forward here to press this, the start of this study? We've got another meeting in 2 weeks. I think it could be reasonable that in 2 weeks, Ørsted has an action plan back to us as to how and when, where they're starting their studies.
I could certainly report again in 2 weeks' time about the specific dates of things.
Yeah, because it would seem immediately following that we're in that 45-day comment period.
That's right.
Yeah. And I would hope that Ørsted wouldn't want to have the comment being that you really haven't done anything.
Get this thing moving.
This has been being put together for many, many months.
No, I understand it, John, but now I know what Ørsted was waiting for. At this point, they were waiting for the green light on the on the Article 7 process, and that they've got it. There's no reason to hold this up, and every reason to get going on it. Just that this study truly is relevant to what's going on here.
Yeah, I don't want to be a defender of Ørsted necessarily here, Jim, but a lot of what's held this up, if that's the way to phrase it, have been requirements.
Sure.
And one of the main ones has been, safety requirements. There's a lot of different people involved here. There's a lot of different vessels. There's private commercial vessels and going to be involved in the trawl survey, which Cornell typically uses, and we felt would be valuable since local fishermen are going to be part of the survey. We felt that would be, perhaps people would see that as a plus. All those vessels and individuals have to be certified to safety procedures. The vessels themselves have to be certified. For example, there were in the early discussions on, how to set up the arrays of receivers. There was diving involved, and it took a little while to go through the safety procedures and the do's and don'ts and cans and can'ts, and diving became out. So then the whole type of receiver that is going to be deployed had to change to something that could pop up to the surface on its own and be retrieved by a boat on the surface. So things like that, back and forth, have taken a lot of time.
Right.
It's a major undertaking. Very interesting.
So do we have anything else on this?
on this? Yeah.
I think we're good, Mila. Are we good?
Yeah. Okay. I'll follow up with you guys over email for the rest of it.
Thank you, Mila.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, next on new business, Little Northwest Creek, secret report. Drew Bennett or Chris Carrillo? I don't believe Drew Bennett's on tonight. Chris, maybe you can outline the purpose of this. I don't know whether any of us have had an opportunity to review this. It's really just a question and answer draft that was done between Drew Bennett and Bill Hayjack helped them with it. This is part of the requirements for not our permitting for the dredging at Little Northwest Creek, but to get funding from the state. It's one of the conditions. So Chris, maybe you could fill the board in.
Sure. So sort of on recommendation from Drew and Billy, we did proceed with the secret analysis here, sort of a 3-draft document that was forwarded out by Arlene today. These guys did a really nice job on the draft that led us towards a negative declaration. And at this point, it's ready to be submitted for Little Northwest Creek, and we should be ready to move forward on this. So everybody did a nice job, and it's something that Jim and I spoke about here that is a good learning curve for us as a trustee board as well, and some other future projects we might be involving ourselves in order to make sure we're going through the proper procedures and getting these either negative or not declarations on the secret process, so that the town and everybody else is comfortable that we're handling these types of projects in the proper process and in due course. So this thing's ready to go forward.
All right. That said, first, are there any questions?
No, I did take a look at them and read them, and it looks like we're ready to go. It's exciting.
All right. Would anybody like to make a motion to accept this?
I'd like to
I'll make a motion to accept the documents for SECRA.
Okay, motion by Tim, seconded by Susan. And if we can, we'd like to do a roll call vote on this. So starting with John Aldred.
Yeah, I also had an opportunity to read all the documents. I thought they did a good job, and I vote yes.
Okay, Francis Bach.
Yeah, I agree with John. I think they did a really good job. I vote yes.
Okay, is Ben Dollinger on?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Ben?
On mute.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And yes, absolutely.
Okay, Rick Drew?
Yes.
Okay, Tim? I'm
Yes.
assuming yes. I vote yes. Mike Martinson?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
And Bill Taylor?
Yes.
Okay, this is unanimous. Motion's approved. Next order of business, Georgia Pond Management Report. Has everybody had a chance to look that pretty voluminous document over?
Jim, I had a chance to look at it, and it continues to impress. It's a great work in progress that, continues to get updated, which is good. I was wondering if at some point we could maybe put together a ponds committee meeting on it in the near future. I ran into Sarah recently, and she would really like to catch up with the ponds committee if you and Ben are available sometime in the near future.
Sure. But are we ready to accept this?
I mean, based on the conversation I had with her, I think it might be appropriate to table it and bring it up at the next meeting.
All right.
I looked at the document, and I just had one question. I haven't responded to Sarah about it yet, but maybe I'll just ask it now. I noticed that the 2019 data wasn't part of the plan. Now may have just been timing of the writing of the plan, but I know there were, the conditions in 2019 were significantly different than they were before that. So,
all right, I can ask Sarah. I mean, this, guys, this is one of those things we can accept, whatever we're accepting, whether it's tonight or down the road. This is more or less a living document. This thing's going to be getting changed every year, maybe a couple times a year. It's going to be a work in progress. It is a condition of our dredging and the dredging permit that we have, the maintenance dredging permit. One of the conditions of that was the preparation of this document and the submittal of this document to the DEC. So there is a point here where we don't want to sit on this indefinitely, because as an example, town of Southampton found themselves basically faced with the same conditions a number of years ago. And it was one of those things. It was real easy to kick the dialogue down the road and say, I'll deal with this next time, deal with it next time. But, we are going to get in the not so distant future, we're going to be looking to renew permits. And the very first thing that's going to come up is the fact whether we have this document in place. So I don't want to sit on this for indefinitely, but I am more than happy to put it on hold, and let's have a meeting with the Ponds Committee, and perhaps it would actually be nice to basically not limit this to the Pond Committee, but let Sarah perhaps come to our next meeting and present at that.
That sounds great, Jim.
That's a great idea.
yeah, I agree.
We can still get together.
All right. If anybody, I know we've got the online version. What I did go to the trouble of doing is I did have a hard copy printed and bound. I'll leave it in the trustee office if anybody prefers reading from paper as opposed to off the computer. There was some of the appendices were really hard to get to on that computer document. So they're included in this printed one.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
All right. So that's another thing that we're not going to vote on. The next was Village of East Hampton, proposed code changes.
Yes.
Again, did everybody have an opportunity to look this over and develop some opinion on it?
I think it was very well done, very well prepared, and I agree with the changes personally.
I do as well. Chris?
Yeah, Jim, I mean, from an alcohol and smoke use perspective, I think they're appropriate guidelines and help, represent our community, properly. So I like them too.
Well, the one comment I wanted to make on this is it's a real breath of fresh air in terms of the relationship with the Village of East Hampton. As many of us know, over the years, we've had sort of an on-again, off-again relationship with the village where things were enacted and we really weren't involved in it. I find the new administration has actually been very, very proactive at approaching the trustees, and I want to thank them.
I agree. I read the changes, and I think they were very done in a very common sense kind of a way. And many of the things we had talked about in the past about the vaping and where it was applied and where it wasn't applied seemed to come out in those changes. So,
and I know, Rick, I did receive an email from you earlier today about some of the other things. Francis and I had a meeting with Jerry Larson and some of the caterers moving forward on beach events, and there is a whole separate dialogue being applied to that very much involves the trustees in the discussion. So
that's great. Thanks for the update.
All right. That said, would somebody like to make a motion to vote on this evening?
I'll make a motion to vote on it this evening. The
Second.
Village of East Hampton.
Okay, would somebody like to second?
I'll second.
Okay. This will be a roll call vote as well. John?
Yes, I vote to accept these changes.
Thank you. Francis?
I think they did a terrific job addressing our previous concerns, and I'm voting yes to accept the changes.
Thank you. Ben?
Mute,
You might be
Ben.
muted.
Ben?
Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Ben.
Okay. That's a yes for me.
Okay.
About 20 years ago, I might have thought differently, but I'm good with it.
Okay, Rick?
Yes.
Okay, Tim Garneau?
Yes.
Yes. Jim Grimes? Mike Martinson?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Susan, we already know that you're yes. Bill?
Yes.
All right, the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Let's see. Moving on to old business.
Oh, okay. Proposed new legislation regarding the trustees' staggering of election terms. I'm going to be very brief on this. Just wanted to let everyone know that Jim, Bill, and I have submitted the draft legislation to Fred Thiel, Assemblyman Fred Thiel, and Dan Spitzer approved and said it's exactly what we need. The terms have been spelled out in the document, and I sent it back to Fred's office in Albany. So we're on our way. It will not, if it is passed, it will not take effect until the year 2023. So it will not have impact this coming election. They've already moved forward with the legislation proposals that they have planned for this year. So this would be for 2023. And the way that this works is the top 5 vote getters would serve 4-year terms, and then the remaining 4 trustees would serve 2 years, and then they would rotate and have the opportunity to be 4-year as the elections go. But this is to create stability, it's to create continuity, and to just have a less confusion with the public, because normally we have 18 candidates, and that's quite a few for people to become confused. So I think we all think that this is a good thing to create the stability and get people, to be able to work on their projects instead of every year having to, you have 1 year of work and then 1 year when you're out running again. So looking forward to this. And Jim and Bill, thank you very much.
Hey, Susan, thank you. And Milla, and say thanks to Dan.
Milla and Dan, yep.
Yep. Hey, the only thing that did come up in this, and the question continues to be brought up, that we have this imbalance every 2 years. 1 year there'll be 4 people up, the following year there'll be 5 people up, and how you could possibly even that out. I know there was suggestions of actually having the clerk run as a separate one every 2 years, a little like the town supervisor. I've thought about it. Perhaps we could settle this with feats of strength.
I thought the trustees have always elected their own clerk.
And that was our answer. That was our answer. And I really don't see a major power play personally occurring over 4 or 5 members coming up every 2 years. I really, and I personally, I would want to see the election of the clerk maintained to be done by the board as a whole.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's not me.
It was me.
Okay. Anyway,
Someone called.
Anyway, I don't think there's anything else on that. And Susan, thank you. And Bill, thanks. And we're now getting down to the mooring report.
Moving on.
Yeah, the Harbor Management Committee and the Aquaculture Committee met and discussed this at pretty great length. And I know John's done a lot of work on the mooring field over in 3 Mile. I'm a member of the Aquabonic Committee as well, I think, as Mike is. So we know we all try to talk this through a little bit. And in general terms, and I'll turn it over to John and see what he wants to add, or Mike. We felt that if there's existing mooring areas, if we can drive moorings there while there's room, that's our best option as we take a look at more demand for moorings in all the trustee water bodies. John or Mike, do you guys want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, you know, the issue came up when people who live in the vicinity of the harbor but not on the harbor requested specific spots for a mooring in their own interest. And I think we've pretty much agreed in our meeting to resolve these issues. Well, you know, we felt as though it could be problematic if just everybody on the bay side of Girard Drive got a mooring wherever they wanted. So I think we felt that when all is said and done, someone lives on the harbor, you know, they'll generally be able to get a mooring off their house. If anyone else applies for a mooring, they'll be directed to one of the small fields that we maintain at Louse Point or Landing Lane or Shipyard Lane or Girard Park. And there is some room to accommodate some moorings there. But I think we have to all understand and keep it in the back of our minds that if we get a lot more requests for moorings from people who don't necessarily live on the harbor, we might have to think about either, you know, think about what to do in terms of expanding a mooring field or creating a mooring field or restricting moorings.
Just to residents, John? When you say restricting, do you mean just to the residents then?
Well, restricting to, we just have so much room for mooring fields.
Right.
We don't feel we can expand the mooring field without impacting the rest of the harbor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying we can or we can't. I'm just saying we have what we have now. And if we get more demand, we'll have to somehow address it.
Right, but so my question is, would that restriction be to only the residents of Louse Point, Girard Drive, rather than have people come in from other areas? Is that something that you've thought about? The group, Mike?
I'm looking at your question as something in the future. I mean, I don't know where all the boats come from now, to tell you the truth. I mean, there might be a boat off Shipyard Lane from somebody who lives in Northwest Woods, for all I know. I don't think so, but...
So I'm just saying that could be something that's in the future that you might wish to restrict to only residents if there's too many requests for moorings. So I'm suggesting.
Well, I think most people are either second homeowners or first homeowners. I don't think people are commuting from out of town to use these moorings. But the question of residency may not be clear between those two groups. I'm not sure. But I do think it's folks, for the most part, because we do put some of the moorings out. Other local guys put moorings out. And usually it's the folks who are living in the area. You know, they can car top their dinghy, or they have a pulley line or something, or they just wade out or swim out.
I would assume so. Okay. Have you seen an uptick in moorings requests this year?
The demand for dockage and moorings is definitely up, as is boating in general. So yes, it's become very popular as a recreation.
I would assume because of the pandemic that a lot of people who have decided to come and live full time here in their second homes, or even to rent a home, that would create the increase in mooring permits requests?
I think in Accabonac, there is some room for, boats in areas, for example, off Girard Park. I think they're if I've got these numbers right, I think in the past there have been in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 boats. I believe currently now there are 6. And, the people who've requested to come in will direct there. So perhaps bring that up to 7 or 8 or 9 again. So I don't think it's necessarily a huge influx of boats now. It's just juggling, new people who want to come in and replacing it with people who've perhaps, gone to a different place.
I try
Hey,
to
John,
put
what about-
myself into 1 second here. Just I try to put myself into the applicant's kind of shoes. And in this case, this one applicant that we have, I understand, I have a shorefront home. Maybe I already have a mooring out back in a waterway that can get rough during certain winds. And, if I had another mooring that I could put in the harbor for those stormy days, I think that, the mooring field should work just fine for that, if that's the scenario. And the other thing about the mooring field is it eliminates the potential threat to our marshes and grasslands and protected, ecology along the shoreline from, accessing the mooring. I think that's why the mooring field, plays a key role in one, the aesthetic of the beauty of the harbor, but it also preserves the grasses and the footprint along the shoreline.
Right, that's true, makes sense.
Yeah, that's an important point. So I don't know if Jim, how you want to handle this, but this is a request from the office for some direction. I don't know if you want to create a vote about it or just figure that.
Well, it doesn't sound like there's really a motion to be made here necessarily tonight, unless you feel otherwise, John.
I'll leave this up to you.
Do we want to have I think we should make a motion to add 2 or 3 mooring positions to the pre-existing grid. I think it's important, Jim, because I do think there is potential for more demand, and I think making it official is appropriate. I'd like to make a motion to add 3 moorings to the pre-existing mooring grids in Accabonac Harbor.
Okay. That's perfect. Do we have somebody that would like to second?
I'll second that.
And who was that?
Tim.
Tim, thank you. Okay. How do we vote?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion. John again. Kayak report.
Well,
This is my next question. How many kayak spaces do we have left?
Guys, I'm so sorry to pop in here. It's Allison. Can I just ask a question about that vote that you guys just did and adding those moorings? Are you specifically, because the way you verbalized it, it sounded like the whole harbor in general. Are we specifically referring to that mooring grid over at Girard Park? Because that will be something I need to know tomorrow going into the office.
That's what I thought we were talking about. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Thanks, guys.
Yes.
Thank you.
Awesome,
Thanks,
thank you.
Al.
Well, my understanding of the issue, the kayak issue, is at the last meeting, we voted for some direction, to give some direction to the office about what the nature of kayaks on the wrecks, one of which was a weight limit. And there have been some questions about some kayaks that have come in around the weight limit. And, some people have said, put down, say, my kayak weighs 75 pounds, or my kayak weighs 74 pounds, when clearly, or with a little research, it seems as though that's a much heavier kayak. So I think, to me anyway, the question that's being asked is, are we sticking to this, or are we going to abandon this?
Abandon the weight limits?
Yes.
Well, I kind of feel like it's kind of when you walk up with your luggage to go on a flight, you know, when they ask you how much it weighs and you tell them. I would prefer they didn't weigh my luggage personally.
They weigh your luggage.
I know, but I would prefer they didn't.
I know. I've had to take
Right,
my
but they
fins out
charge
of the
you for
bag.
They charge you for that overage. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so who's going to weigh somebody's kayak and who's going to go and make sure that...
Do we want, you know, Allison could answer these questions a lot better than any of us could. She's been looking at these. Do we want to ask her to?
Yeah, Allison,
run down here.
Give a report and an opinion.
You got it. So we've got about 10 so far that have come in, 2 of which were honestly, you know, written as overweight, and have requested I don't know what you call it, a
ground floor
variance. Can you please grant it? The other ones were suspicious in that they were tandems, and from looking at all the other ones, seemed like they were a little bit overweight. Looking at manufacturers' specs online, look as though some of them can be about 79 to 80, some are 88, some are upwards of 90 pounds. And that's about 10 of them right now. And it's mostly all the tandems.
All right.
that have been overweight. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Have we had any issues with our kayak racks collapsing under the weight of these tandems?
Well, we've had repairs that have had to be made.
Well,
nobody's really, you know, looked at cause and effect, however.
Yeah, no, I've been involved in some of the repairs, and to me, most of the time the repairs were actually related to the fact that the rails last less time than the post. You know, the posts for these kayak racks are made out of locust. They last a good long time. The rails are mixed hardwood, and that could be anything from ash to maple to whatever. You know, so they last as long as they last. It's
would changing the limit to 100 pounds get rid of the problem?
None of them.
If you're going to do that, why do we have limits?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Francis. If we're 100 pound, it's going to be
just eliminate it.
Get the whole thing.
Anything goes.
And then also maybe just have it so that the heavier kayaks have the bottom racks.
Well, that's a whole nother step that we haven't taken yet. And how are we going to enforce that? We talked about in the future, and there's another thing of how fast can we do something in the future, numbering racks and assigning kayaks to racks. But, you know, you can just get so crazy about it. Mm-hmm. Ideally, you put a heavy tandem kayak on a lower rack so it doesn't, you know. But are we going to start micromanage? How micromanaging are we going to get with this?
I think we're making more trouble for the entire project. It's supposed to be a convenience, and I don't see us going out and policing people. And if their kayak is too heavy, what are we going to do? Call them up and, you know, give them a ticket?
Trim the fat?
Well, no. The gate is at the application process, and that's where we are, and we're just identifying the complication. So here we are.
Right.
Do we
I'd like to make a motion that we get rid of the weight limit on the application.
Second.
All right.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed?
I'm going to abstain. I'm going to abstain.
Does the application ask if it's a single or double kayak? I forgot.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. So I mean that could steer you to like lower rack for doubles and upper rack for singles. That could be a guideline.
Okay. All right. So as it stands, the motion would be would carry to remove the weight limits on the kayaks. Correct?
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so we got 8 yes and 1 abstention, correct?
Right.
Yes.
All right, motion's carried. Now
Progress.
in soft clams, John, you must feel like this is just.
Dogs.
John, do you want me to start this one or do you want to take it?
No, please.
Once again, the Harbor Management Committee and the Aquaculture Committee met and discussed the powering of soft clams. There was a request from the Baymen's Association to continue powering this year, and we talked about this, at length, because we recognize the economic importance of a little shot in the arm during the summer doldrums. Maybe the net fishing slow, gives everyone a little, economic help. Is working on the water, which is important. And the conversation also got into the importance of taking next steps towards a management plan. We touched on that at the end of Dr. Gobler's discussion. And I think we asked the question, had we reached a plateau of putting out seed clams and harvesting them and taking them, and there's increased recreational use, there's economic pressure for Baymen to take more shellfish to, survive working on the waters. So we came to a point where we felt it was fair to maybe have a little bit shorter season this year, requesting some journaling and reporting on the take in certain areas that are going to be permitted, maybe having an area that's a control or a closed harbor, and use some of this data to lead into a management plan / study, with a component being something like Dr. Gobler wanting to study impacts on shellfish when you adjust nitrogen or temperature or salinity, and see if we can't start to create more environment, maybe an oyster reef or some areas that aren't open to harvest. And see, Mike had some great thoughts on abundance and how maybe we just don't have enough abundance to overcome predation and density. So it was a pretty big discussion, but I think where we got was offering the guys a limited season. Mike had suggested maybe around, holiday time in the summer, the price is high, maybe a 3 or 4 week engagement, and do request journaling of the take by harbor, as detailed as possible within the open areas. Wouldn't be everywhere, but there would be a season with input from the Baymen. And then this collaborative group of aquaculture and harbor management would continue the discussion. Water qualities meeting with Dr. Gobler, obviously, it's a real collaborative effort to try and bring everyone together. Cornell's doing work on nitrogen loading. I think it's time to kind of sew all this together and see if we can't make some improvements. So, but bottom line on powering would be a limited season, 3 to 4 weeks, with a request for journaling and reporting from the Baymen. And then before any further powering, we would get the management plan underway. John or Mike, you want to try and put an edge on that? I know that was kind of long-winded, but that's where we got to. Thank you.
I thought that was good. And I think, Mike, didn't you had brought up about sanctuaries as part of this?
Yeah, well, I have a kind of like a schematic of management for a bay that I think would be, we're kind of in an ideal situation to be able to, pick one of our harbors that the Baymen agree would be their choice for one that's the least, economically vital harbor for everybody, and then use that as a an experimental platform for some serious bay management with sanctuary, as well as aquaculture and commercial, activity. So to put it simply, if you envision a bay as a watch or a clock, and you divide it into pie slices, and you create a sanctuary in the middle, that sanctuary is completely protected permanently. But then each one of the pie slices is allocated as either aquaculture, temporary sanctuary, or commercial harvest. And then this dial rotates on a 5-year cycle. So for 5 years, there's aquaculture activity happening on one pie slice. And underneath my farm and all of my fellow farmers' farms, there tends to be a huge amount of, shellfish falling to the floor. And if we could preserve that, so let's say the gear that the aquaculturist is using, fine to harvest from, anything that gets blown out or lost is left on the bottom and protected. And that's something that is the aquaculturist kind of like fee for being able to use that bottom land. And then, so imagine that for 5 years, there's aquaculture activity on this area with shellfish falling to the floor, protected. And then the clock turns and that pie slice jumps over one notch. So now that protected area that was underneath my farm is now a sanctuary that's protected for 5 years. And once we rotate again, the commercial harvest rotates into that 5-year temporary sanctuary, and there's an abundance. It's going to be a really strong hit. There'll be a neighboring slice that's got that 5-year protection. It's going to have to be some real honor amongst those that work the bay, and they're going to have to really, respect that line. Enforcement wise, there could be some issues, and there's going to have to be some pretty stringent, penalties for folks that were working in a sanctuary. But I really think that with this kind of management, the bay could actually feed itself, and this could be a model that the world uses to,
Theoretically, I think it's more like Wheel of Fortune, Mike, and you might be playing Alex Trebek at this point, but to me, I think it has real potential merit here, because it is rotational. You're moving, you're not overfishing just one area. You're leaving areas fallow, which would be underneath this floating gear. I like the idea personally.
I think it's a wonderful idea and very creative as well. So I would be in favor of that. I'd just like to pipe up for a second when I'm hearing this back and forth between Aquaculture Committee and the Harbor Management Committee. I am a member of the Aquaculture Committee, and I have not been to any of these meetings or spoken about any of this. So I'd like to be included.
Susan, it was one meeting that was kind of an ad hoc call, and going forward, we'll have to figure out how to work you into the discussion.
Figure out how to work me into the discussion?
Yeah, because we just started.
I'm wondering how I was eliminated to begin with.
Susan, it was mainly a mooring.
It was a Harbor Management Committee meeting.
And it was more.
Well, I've heard that it was a combination of aquaculture and harbor management. So I would like to be included in the future.
I would characterize it as having been more of a harbor management / acabonic.
Yeah, I may have misspoke as well. Sorry. Didn't mean to get you upset.
Yeah, we are sorry. This sprouted out of an acabonic and harbor management get together. And then the aquaculture kind of, just kind of blossomed from that conversation.
All right.
All right. So last year, you definitely would have been there because you're acabonic, right? This year, you're not on the.
No, I switched out. I joined Jim in Napeague.
Right. So,
I'm
you
in
know,
the peak now, but still
that's how it
aquaculture.
happened. Just so you know.
Can we get back on point, guys? And are we okay with a limited season with a requirement for journaling and reporting for a powering season and a committee, let's call it, that will work together to look at a management plan going forward with input from the Bayman and other resources like Dr. Gobler or Cornell and Barley, of course, as part of this. Is that something we can get behind at this point?
I would like to support that.
I'd just like to have a discussion about specifying this season, what it's going to be, this powering season.
I'd like it to be 3 to 4 weeks, one season at a time of the Bayman's choosing. That would be my preference, John.
Is that all harbors or?
All except one. That was, I think that's what we decided on with finite areas. The Bayman can pick a finite number of areas in all harbors except the control harbor. And they can have input on the control harbor as well. That is my recollection of where we got to in general terms.
This is Arlene. Can I butt in? How long is this designated time going to be? You know, 2-month period, 3-month period? We should vote on the length of the time.
I'd said
at
3
their
to 4
choosing.
weeks. 3
Okay.
to 4 weeks. 3 to 4
Thank
weeks
you.
was the recommendation, Arlene.
Okay, so let's hear the whole thing and we'll write it down. Yeah, I'll write down the motion. That way I get all the facts.
I would make a motion that we would open powering for up to 4 weeks in designated areas with input from the Bayman, retaining one trustee water body as a pilot safe haven area in preparation for the upcoming study.
Thank you.
And do we have an idea of what time of year we want to open that up? Is that 3 to 4 weeks?
That would be from input from the Bayman, probably based on market prices.
Okay. There seemed to be like some interest around, I guess, early March. Seems to always pop up. But we can get more.
Wasn't this a summer activity that we did last year?
You know, to me, the question here is what Bayman are we gonna, how are we gonna define the Bayman? We've had different input from different people over the years.
Can we go through the Fisheries Advisory Council maybe, or you know, you tell me.
Well, we responded to a request from certain Baymen. We're making this public. We can reach out to the other guys, and maybe they need to nominate 2 people to come before us and present the case of the Bayman. You know, so why don't we accept up to 2 members of the Bayman to interface with our group and make the recommendation, 2 or 3 guys.
I'm not opposed to making that a larger number than 2. You could very easily get 2 Baymen from, one posse, and then have another posse of Baymen that are feeling unrepresented.
Sure. What would you recommend, Mike?
I would recommend that we give a feeler out for folks that would like to, how many folks want to be heard.
You want to do a little public comment period of 30 days or something? We have a little bit of time.
That could do it. Something where we get the word out and folks have a right to, be heard.
Okay, so part of the process will be to have a public comment period for input on the powering season.
I think that's great.
All right, we want to put this, do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
What's the motion?
Well, no, that's what I was.
For the 3 to 4 weeks for the power.
That's what I was asking for.
Let me go back to what I stated, Jim, and see if it still makes sense.
3 to 4 weeks is what you said.
To open a powering season for up to 4 weeks.
Okay.
In designated areas of trustee waters, excluding one waterway as our base or control harbor, and the sites are to be chosen through a public comment period to take place over the next 30 days.
All right. Somebody want to second this motion?
I will.
All right. Okay, people.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So Mike, you made the motion? Who made the motion? Rick?
Rick?
I think I did.
Rick did.
Okay.
Susan, you seconded?
Yes, sir.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, vote carried. Committee reports?
We have Napeag and Lazy Point. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
You're jumping ahead.
Sorry.
Okay, Acabana Cog Creek. We have an application by Joel Halsey for, what's the name of the property owner here? For the Fresco property.
Yeah, the 19 Isle of Right. I think we were waiting on notice of the vegetation plan for the upland.
A vegetation plan has been submitted.
Great.
It was scanned out to you, Rick, True, about a week or two ago, when it came out.
Right. Yep, thanks.
Everything's in.
Arlene.
I think we were going to send them out a dock bill for their dock usage on the shoreline, and we were going to move forward.
All right, so we're gonna need a motion to close this out.
Motion to close out the permit at 19 Isle of Right, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-37-2-6.
All right, I am recusing myself on this. The company prepared the revegetation plan, so if somebody else could take this vote.
A second.
I have a question here. Wasn't there some discussion about an application fee for?
Well, I think, John, I think moving forward, what we really should do is we should have an elevated fee for these post-construction applications. The only thing is you really can't target, you can't target the application before you. You can't come up with that rule in the middle of reviewing something. So if we could perhaps get some language or something together, Chris Carrillo, for our next meeting to address that, we can then vote on that. And any applications that come before us post this, that would be applied to. Does that make sense?
But are there any thoughts on structure as far as how to bill for these types of permits post-construction?
You know, there's a certain.
Chris, we did talk about this a little bit. I don't know if you were in on the conversations, but we thought it would be a separate permit, and it would be, something to the effect of a post-construction permit or a construction without permit application to clean it up, and it typically does require more effort, administration in the office. Perhaps your services are required. So we did feel that the permit fee would appropriately be more expensive than the regular dock permit or whatever it may be that's submitted properly.
Yeah, I think so too, Rick. And I don't think it's in the idea that you want to be punitive, but it's more of a deterrent. I think it's important because if you come up with a low end number, it can incentivize a homeowner from just moving forward with their project and then begging for forgiveness. So in order to deter this type of behavior in the future, it probably would help to have a significantly elevated fee structure here. And I don't know if it's different for different types of projects or docks or basins or what, but yeah, you want a number so that a homeowner doesn't look at it and go, oh, well, we'll just move forward with the project and we'll pay the fee for the permit post construction.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that it be 10 times.
Yeah, that's probably about right. And I don't know, do we want to have Chris just look at this a little further, Jim, and we'll table it for one meeting cycle?
But I think that makes sense. I was not looking to target this particular application, but certainly this shined a light on the situation.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey,
So can we
Jim,
add that
can you tell me-
to the next meeting, please?
Yes.
Can I ask, what are we asking here for a dock fee? Are we asking for a fee for the period of time this property owner has owned this property, those back dock fees?
No,
Just
no, the
asking
dock,
for
it's
1
going
year.
to be a dock fee going forward. I think it was going to be around $100, John. So it's just more of a standard dock fee. You know, the community's lost the shoreline to a rather extensive hardening process, and it's a basin. It's a unique dock configuration, and you know, I think the consensus, or at least lack of any opposition, was that we'll do a standard fee that's reasonable on it and move forward and learn from it, and you know, build better procedures from it.
What would have been our permit fee had they just opened the permit prior to this construction?
$150, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that was submitted, though. I think they did submit a basic permit and fee.
Okay.
And then they'd have an annual dock fee that goes along with it.
Sounds good. I'll work on some language. That's easy enough.
All right.
Yep.
So, moving on. Lazy Point, Napeag.
Did we vote on this yet?
I thought we did. Table?
I think it was a motion and a second to go ahead, and then I thought you said you were going to table it.
No,
Well, the table was on the increased permit fee, but if we didn't vote on closing the application, I think we should complete that.
Yeah, let's close the application and then work on a punitive forgiveness fee.
Yeah.
You want to call roll call, Jim?
What's that?
You want to call for a vote on the motion, please?
You want? I'll call for a vote.
Please, Bill.
Guys, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed?
Yes, I am. I'm trying to understand exactly what you guys are approving. This is a boat basin. This basin is on this man's property. It's not on trustee property. And I'm really, really having a hard time with it. The previous owner dug out his own land. Rick, I'm talking.
Line of their property with bulkheading at the public's expense, and they are using it as if it's their own property. And I do think it's fair they use it specifically as a dock, and the entire shoreline is lost to the basin and further a cement bulkhead. I think it's very fair to ask for a reasonable permit fee on it, and that's my position on it. So
I thought we had moved to Lazy Point.
My position is that this predates, when was this built? 70s?
Early 70s, correct. We haven't been punitive in any regard, asking for any back dockage or any type of, tear it out and do something else.
I know for a fact that
May I interrupt for a moment here? I'd just like to let you know, excuse me, one moment on this property. This property is on the market for sale, and this gentleman has owned the house for several years. His broker called me, his exclusive broker. So I'm sure he wants to wrap up the dock issue so he can market the property with the dock.
Well, I'm not willing to take over private property and issue permits on it.
Well,
it makes no sense to me.
Well,
this was done in the 1970s. Somebody dug this out on their own. It wasn't a secret. It clearly was no secret. It's lived there ever since. It's never been permitted, and now all of a sudden we're taking jurisdiction on private property.
Hey, Francis, could I
for a permit?
But Francis,
this guy's asking for a permit.
Francis, could we just back up for just 1 minute? And I'm not, I'm not advocating for anybody here, but along with the application, there is a C of O going back to 1977, okay, that does not specifically describe the basin, but it does refer to the survey dated November 10th, 1977 by Smith and Young, which does in detail describe the basin. Okay, so when you say that there was no permits, whether there was permits or not, it appears that the town of East Hampton issued a C of O related to this structure back in 1977. The issue seems to be, and it seems to be the fact that the present owner rebuilt this basin with only DEC permits. They did not have ZBA, they did not have trustee permits, and it was described
Jim, what I'm
done in error.
Right.
Jim, I'm questioning why
on this
Rick,
is that sections of the basin are forward of mean high tide. So you do have parts of this basin, I believe, on trustee property. That's on the survey. You can see it.
Well,
and this permit should be based on that and that only.
Using part of the trustees property. So I do think there's a very legitimate reason to ask for a fair dock fee.
Well, and Francis, could I just point out too that once that basin was excavated and the waters of the harbor were allowed to cover and that area became intertidal, I would think by virtue of that fact, we basically took ownership there.
So how many feet deep does that occur?
I think there's other inconsistencies like this around the harbor. I've always wondered why we consider Halsey's Marina trustee.
Exactly.
And Shagwong, we don't charge them. That seems to be considered a private property. To me, they both look out.
Shagwong was done the same exact way, and we do not charge them.
Well, we charge them for something. I think, again, what may be out, past.
Yeah, outside. That was the end of the bulkhead area.
Correct.
We don't charge Shagwong for anything. Yeah.
We didn't charge a lot, Francis. It wasn't, like we measured every inch of it. We set a fee that was just over the minimum. So.
Well, I think we need to.
The shoreline has been hardened. It's not like it's a small piece of property with a little dock sticking out. It's almost their entire shoreline is hardened. It was quite a,
But that shoreline, Rick, is inland of the property line.
Francis, it shows it as beyond mean high water. It's waterward of it. You know what I mean? It's not just like it's all behind high water. The survey shows it. And when I was there, the water was way further up than the survey shows. The water goes well up further than their hardening structures.
Yeah, are there any pictures of this?
If you Google the house,
any Google map.
If you Google the house and go to the corporate
Right, but
listing,
pictures are, I think current pictures are always helpful.
That we're supposed to be looking at shows it. You know what I mean? It's the actual survey from both the earlier one and the recent as-built. Look at the mean high water line. The structure's outside of it.
Okay.
Yes, but that's only a few feet, Rick. But this permit.
It's two sections of the end of the bulkhead. You've lost the entire shoreline in between, and then when you go further up the creek, you have 20 feet of hardened bulkhead that continues further, and most of that is beyond, again, the mean high water mark. So there's other structures that are involved as well that I'm not even, looking to make a fuss about. I think it's being very, very reasonable.
Hey, Francis, Chris Perlo. Francis,
Chris, yes.
You and I spoke about this briefly in the last few weeks, and as I'm sitting here listening to the conversation, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes and kind of trying to understand the downside to asserting trustee jurisdiction where, as some of the trustees are mentioning, and I kind of had that opinion as well, that the part, at least on the front of the property line where the bulkhead touches the bottomlands, certainly would be in trustee jurisdiction, just like we would give any other permit for Phragmites or anything else that maybe had a question mark of where exactly the line was. But, I'm worried that if we don't assert jurisdiction here, that the precedent we might set would be to say, if you had an old bulkhead, go ahead and do whatever you want with it. So I'm just trying to find a downside to asserting our jurisdiction here.
I think where we are right now is we've had a motion, a second, and a vote, and the vote was 8-1. So I mean,
it was, yes.
Okay,
I would like to, excuse me, I
It's not
voted.
8-1. I recused myself on it, so it was
Okay.
7-1.
I would like to state, I did not vote on this. I thought we were voting on Lazy Point. So I am not voting right now. So that's 7.
How did you get to Lazy Point?
Can I just explain something? I 100% agree that anything that is outside on trustee property should be included in this permit. I am absolutely opposed to anything that's on the inland side of that, which includes a walkway completely around the basin. And that's where the actual dockage is inside that basin. That came from private property, and I don't think it should be part of the permit.
So should we charge a fee for the structure that's outside on trustee property?
Absolutely.
All right, so our minimum fee is $75. It was proposed at $100. Should we agree to $75 as a minimum administrative fee each year, and we fulfill our requirements that Chris mentioned, and we move forward?
I think the distinction he's trying to make is do we need to, the devil's in the details, be clear on what exactly we're charging for, and if the trustees agree that the jurisdiction shouldn't extend into or on trustee, private property, it's one thing, but it remains to be seen. Jim makes a decent argument that perhaps it becomes trustee property once it has tidal flow. So I don't have
and the shoreline was dredged there. It's much deeper than the shoreline next door. So, there just was a lot of use there that needs to be considered, whether it's new legislation that takes that all into account, or the fact that it's being used as a dock kind of makes it a little easier to move forward here, and we charge a very fair fee and move forward. I feel it's being used as a dock. A dock is a dock. And
okay, so we're going after Shagwon?
The boat's a 20-foot boat. It probably sticks out a little bit over trustee property anyway.
Are we going after Shagwon?
I don't know the history of Shagwon, so I can't speak to the particulars there. If there's structure or activity on trustee property, it should be considered.
No,
I honestly don't know that property very well, Francis, so I can't comment right now. But I would look at it with you if you would like to, for sure.
It's a boat basin that was done the same exact way. We do not charge for it.
Yeah, again, I can't. This came before us for a permit and review, and I think we've gotten to a good place. I think it's really fair. And again, a very large portion of this property is disrupted, and it's forward of mean high water, and that's why I feel an annual permit fee that's fair is appropriate. I'm standing by it.
In 1984, they tried to, when they instituted docks, they tried to institute bulkheads, and it was turned down to enormous public upset. I believe that this was done in 1984. And we have Bob Colesdale Basin was before us 2 years ago. So I think if we want to make this a new thing, like Francis said, he's happy to go along with it. But we don't charge for bulkheads. That's something that was.
But this is a bulkhead structure that's designed as a boat basin to function as a dock. So it is, a little bit more specific than that. It is something being used as a dock every year, and again, I feel it is appropriate to request a small fee for using the public's property to have created this structure that's used as a dock.
So did we vote? Was there a vote on it, or was the vote halted?
It was.
This conversation?
There was
no, the vote was 7-1.
Are we closing out the permit and then tabling this, or are we making?
No, I'm going to abstain from voting on this as well. And I, as I said earlier, a few moments ago, I did not vote for this.
So why don't we have another vote on it if everyone's not clear? Is that fair?
I think so.
Let me,
And what do we,
let me
let's
finish the sentence.
clarify what we're voting on, because I
Hey,
think we've had a
Rick.
lot of conversation.
Rick, let me finish my sentence, please. All right. I am withdrawing what I thought was a vote for a lazy point. So at this time, I will abstain from this vote as well.
Okay, so we've got one recusation, we've got one against, and we've got one abstention. So we have 5 yeses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. My vote of yes is based on that. The trustee property it's a living thing. It's moving. Our property line will be extending with rising sea level. And so if somebody digs a hole and it makes that sea level and tide line change, it does become trustee land. And so I justify my vote.
It would seem like the applicant feels the same way, Mike, but I do think that some good points have been brought up tonight. It deserves some greater discussion. But in order to move this meeting along, we have a majority in favor of closing out this permit.
I have a question because I had gone up a while ago to Bob Cold's property in Lion's Head, and he had rebuilt an area where his boat is installed. Is that a similar structure to this property?
Yes, it's similar.
Okay. Do we charge Mr. Cold for a permit?
No, we don't charge him, and I think he would be very angry, and I think the community would probably want a public hearing about our changing a policy.
No, I understand. I'm just
Never done.
because they are
No, we don't. We don't charge any boat
of they're similar structures. That's why I'm asking.
We don't charge anyone for anything other than the dock protruding on the water. So there would be other people that would need to be notified to keep this level, which was what Francis was saying. There are other people that own boat bases. They're interested parties. They would probably like to know why they're suddenly being charged. He was before us 2 years ago. He also has a walkway around it. So maybe we close it and we look into charging for boat basins, for the public hearing. I don't know.
Or somebody adjusts their motion to remove the cost.
We can adjust it, and then why don't we discuss it further if everyone feels that's the best path forward, and if we need to have a public hearing on it, I think we should, because I share Mike's view to some degree. I understand and respect Francis's view, but this is perhaps a bigger discussion than one application. So why don't we close out the permit, and dockage and the committees for this waterway, harbor management and the committees for this waterway should look at this and have a further discussion.
And to be clear, I'm a little confused. Are we doing this on the basis that we're still going to charge a minimum fee, considering that part of this structure extends beyond the mean high water mark?
Well, that was my position, John, but when Arlene says there's other properties like it that aren't being charged, I think we need to better understand if these properties have a similar situation with parts of the structure on trustee property or not, make sure we're doing it equitably. So I do think that's important, and I'm not sure that was considered if there are other similar properties not being charged.
But my concern would be if we back off from that now on this vote, if we don't charge them, then we're compromising our position and down the road.
Well, I don't know that we're saying we're not going to charge them for a dock permit. I think we're tabling how to go about, or if we will charge for a dock fee, but we'll close out the permit subject to further review of dock fee.
Okay.
Chris, does that make sense?
Yeah, Rick, I agree with you. I think let's close this permit out and let's get some better background on the history and charging for boat basins or bulkheads. But I think there's no reason to keep this permit open anymore.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to close the permit subject to further review of boat basin, quasi-docks, and bulkheads as a project, committee project.
Yeah, I think we should do a roll call vote here.
All right.
Are we removing the previous vote then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, new vote.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have John Aldridge, you just voted. Francis Fox, motion to close out permit and revisit the idea of a charge.
I'm going to say no.
Okay. Ben Dollinger,
I'm going to say yes.
Rick Drew,
Yes.
Tim Garneau,
Yes.
Jim Grimes,
I abstain.
right. Mike Martinson,
Actually, I recuse, excuse me, I recuse.
I know, right, recused. Mike Martinson,
I'm not so sure I can vote right now. So
Okay.
I will also recuse.
okay. You're abstain. Susan McGraw-Keeber,
I'm going to abstain.
okay. Bill Taylor,
Aye.
okay. We have 5 votes, 3 abstained and 1 recused. Passed.
Lazy Point.
Next.
Okay,
Lazy Point.
all right, Susan, you're going to take that?
I'll start because I have the papers from a few weeks ago. On March 22nd, there were legal ads run on this. This is Ivan Silich. He would like to transfer his half ownership of the lease of lot 39N at Lazy Point. And the paperwork, I think it's all in place. Tom Osborne is handling the matter. And Arlene, all right, that was from a few weeks ago on March 22nd. Today is April 12th. So I think we're in order with everything that's been done, submitted as paperwork verifying he's a resident of the town of East Hampton. They've also attached a proposed public notice to run in the East Hampton Star for a period of 3 weeks, beginning March 22nd, or maybe a few days earlier. And Arlene, they provided a notarized affidavit of domicile, New York State license ID, town of East Hampton tax bill, and the notarized letter from the current owner.
All right, Chris Carrillo, our counsel, is the paperwork in order on both of these?
The paperwork's all in order. I also spoke with Mr. Voorhees' office today, their attorney. Everything is in order to vote on this now. And the attorneys are in possession of the assignment of lease, which will be signed upon passing and, with an approval vote. So, yeah, time to vote on this one.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the transfer of Ivan Silich's lease holder of 50% of 148 Shore Road. 300, the tax map number is 385-1-19-1. And he wants to transfer the ownership of the lease to his daughter, Catherine Bonds, and his son, Andrea, or I think it is Andrea Silich. Okay,
Second.
make a motion.
Okay, motion made by Susan, second by John Aldridge. How do we vote?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carried.
All right, and the next property is, the owner is Louis Havel, and he is a 50% leaseholder of 160 Shore Road, lot 36N. The tax map number is 385-1-17-1 in Lazy Point, and he would like to transfer 50% of his ownership of the lease he shares with his daughter, Kimberly A. Coletti, and to his son, Edward R. Havel. Mr. Havel has submitted his paperwork verifying he is a resident of the town of East Hampton.
Right.
Arlene, do we have everything else in order?
This motion would be subject to the legal ad running. So you're approving, subject to the legal ad running for 3 weeks.
And I'd spoke with
And
Mr.
Chris
Grimaldi,
was, yeah.
their attorney on this one, and had asked for an accommodation on behalf of the trustees to move this along based on I think the advanced stage in life of the transferor.
Yes.
And I did let him know that I would agree to that accommodation. So again, as Arlene mentioned, we're going to vote on this now, subject to the condition that the legal ad is ran and the affidavit is provided in 3 weeks from now. So that's something
Right.
I'm okay with as well.
Would somebody make a motion on this?
I'll make a motion to approve, subject to legal ad running.
Second.
Who's the second?
John,
Okay.
votes?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, motion carried.
Thank you.
Trustees, it's getting late, but two very quick points here on Lazy Point. I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible. There's two larger discussions here. One, that we're starting to see now with this long-term lease, some of the estate planning going on with families that are owners here. So I think we can expect to see more of these transfers in the future where they're in-family transfers for no consideration. As we know, the trustees have a 4% transfer fee based on a consideration trade. But I think we're going to see more of these. And the one thing we're noticing is that whether somebody pays 600 something grand or whether it's a $0 consideration, still the same amount of time. Arlene works really hard on these, a lot of my time as well. And the trustees are kind of missing out on a transfer fee because there's no consideration. So the Lazy Point committee is going to try to meet here in the next week or so and start putting some ideas together. But a recommendation that I have is to come up with a number on a flat rate transfer fee for these no consideration trades, because it's just a lot of paperwork and a lot of time going in, and we'll meet and we'll discuss more about that. And we're also going to discuss putting together more of a packet so we can have some continuity for prospective purchasers and for the public as a whole as to what it means to become a Lazy Point leaseholder and how to do it. So those are two things we're going to work more on here in the coming weeks and hopefully get that figured out pretty soon.
Sounds terrific. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Okay, records. New trustee website is launched.
Okay, I'll be very quick about this. I actually have it open. I can share my screen. I don't know, have any of you looked at our website? I did send the link out to everyone.
I did.
Okay, it is still a work in progress, but it is primarily pretty much done at this juncture. We're tweaking it every day, and let me just pull this up. I had a very nice call from women in Sag Harbor when we attended the Sag Harbor Water Quality Advisory Committee meeting the other evening, and she wanted to have signs put up on the beach and to see what the water quality would be in Nineveh and the beach havens area. And so what I did was I added some links that are very helpful to the public, and I'm very excited about it. I'm going to pull this up, and I don't know if you can see my screen. I have to share it with you, right? I go to sharing screen. Okay, here we go. Can you see this? Not yet, right? Okay. All right, here we go. So I'm just going to quickly, briefly show you just a little bit of the new look. It's very user-friendly. This is our home page. And thank you for everybody who's written a paragraph about a committee that you serve on. And we go to South Fork Wind up front, Georgica Pond, Accabonac Harbor and Creek. There is an area for news items, events. This is the South Fork Wind Farm. So you see all these links in here that people can go to right away and read about it. And the draft proposal will go on here this evening, and we'll get that posted for people to read about. I'll just take you through on the trustees. Here we are. You have your new email, your official email address. All your committee assignments are here. Clicking on these will take you right to that page. So we have everybody, all the trustees here with all of their assignments. Then we have liaisons. Down at the bottom, we have Facebook to go to. You can email and meetings. All of the meetings will be posted here under meetings, and we'll be loading them up as we have the meetings. The committees are all here. Here's Accabonac Harbor and Hog Creek. With the description of the bodies of water, and here you have your trustee names at the bottom for this committee. Let's see, we'll go down to our pump out boats. Thank you very much, Arlene and Allison, who were able to get pictures of our new pump out boat. And so I think this is, there's a lot of information here for people in the community. Let's see, 3 Mile Harbor. We have
Hey,
to
Susan,
get in here. Yes.
any info on your esteemed legal counsel on here?
Uh-huh. Well, we need a picture. What are you doing this weekend?
I'm around.
Okay, I will get you because we want to do a picture. So we'll get your picture up here, your email and everything. Thank you, thank you.
Great, yeah, great job. The website looks really great.
Yeah, and so here we have permit and application fees. Our little shop, the Captain Rysam Scholarship Fund, is here. Not everything is up yet, but you can now buy online, which is terrific. Let me take you to, what do I want to go to? Okay, coming down here, resident kayak racks, information about kayak storage, bottomlands, duck blinds. These all have their own pages. And I want to go to important links. Where are my important links? About. Important links over here, which I think this is, I'm very excited about this for the public. You have East Hampton Town Trustees links to go to, respecting our beaches, so forth and so on, special events. Down below, you can go to East End Ocean Rescue webcam. This is a live camera on our beaches, tide charts, bathing beach advisories and closures. This lists all the beaches. And this is what the woman in Sag Harbor, she was very excited about this, which I did tell her at the meeting that I would have this up on our new website. Now, for some reason, my internet is very slow all of a sudden. It's going to Suffolk County. I had called Suffolk County and they gave us permission to use their link, and it's not coming up, very slowly. But it is in real time. So if you click on a beach, it will take you directly to the current water quality of that day. And the same for the tidal, the tides. We have several important things here that people will find, I'm sure, very important and turn to for temporary emergency shellfish closures, stormwater information. Going down, we have marine water quality links, Chamber of Commerce connections. We even have included Southampton so that we can share information and news, and down to our county and state and Brookhaven as well. So if you have a moment, please, I'm asking you to, take a look at it. Again, this is a work really in progress with the tweaking and so forth, but it's been 4 months that Michael Hansen has been working on this with me and Allison and Arlene, and I really thank all of you for everything that has gone into this, because I think it's really current. And we have a news area too in the news events, things that pertain to what we are doing. And I send these off. We are going to have classes with Michael. He's offering us a year in our contract with him. And I believe we have, we'll get to the bill, but we have his second half of his bill.
All right.
So take a peek at it and let me know what you think. If you see something that is wrong, please email me and we will get right onto it.
All right. So thank you, Susan. Can we move
great,
on?
Susan. Looks
Yes,
great.
I'm getting out. There you go.
It looks good. Good.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your work, Susan.
Thank you.
Yeah, it looks really great.
It takes a team.
All right. Administrative payment of bills. Optimum 152.58. Amagansett Post Office 322. That's the annual fee. Van Dyke in hand. Trustee accountant, $930. Michael Hanson, second payment on the website, which I do think, well, personally is well deserved. History materials, $5,000 for the opening of Fresh Pond. History materials again, $28,800 for the opening of the Gerard and dredging of the Gerard Cove. Do we have a motion to pay the bills?
Motion to pay the bills.
Okay.
Second.
Is that Rick?
Rick.
Okay.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right. Number 2, authorize trustee funds from the mariculture loan budget to be used to purchase the shellfish hatchery, a chiller system to regulate the water temperature in the grow tanks. There's approximately $2,000. Now, hold on. $2,000 available, but the chiller is $4,069. Arlene, can you clarify?
I wrote it backwards. We have 4,000 in our line budget, and it'll cost 2,000.
Okay,
So,
just wanted to make sure. Do we have a motion? I think this is a good idea.
I'll make a motion again to pay this.
I'll second. That was Rick.
Okay.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody
Aye.
opposed? Motion carried. Financial reports for the month ended February 28th, 2021.
Jim, I had a chance to look at them, and basically they look in order. It's good to see the trustees are fairly robust with their operations. Some grant writing took hold. We have some dredging proceeds, mooring fees, dock fees. The one question I did have was a posting for construction applications on income. I don't know if the office can clarify that journal entry. It was, it's a nice entry, but I just was wondering what the real source of that was. Otherwise, everything looks in order.
Arlene, can you explain that?
It's possible that the LIFA easement money, if it's about 110,000 or something, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, 104,392.70.
That was our LIFA payment. Our accountant needs to make a new line for that. I'm sorry, I wasn't able to. I put it under application.
All right. Do we want to?
I'm good with it. I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Okay.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Leaves us the report of the clerk. Would the clerk like to make a report? Francis?
I thought, no.
No?
I don't have anything.
The clerk has no report. Anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, Susan, second.
I'll second.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Night, guys.
Before we jump off, Arlene, thank you for the notes. And what I will do is I'll drop this stuff off to you tomorrow morning. How's that?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, and everybody.